2020, Squamish, Squamish, Awayame. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. I will say before we adopt the agenda, I understand that there are a number of people watching who are actually interested in a campground discussion, which is part of the special meeting that we had this morning. That meeting will resume at approximately 4 o'clock after this meeting. So you're welcome to stay on, but you don't have to. You might consider coming back about 3:45 if you wanted to catch that item on the agenda. And it'll be on the same WebEx platform. Council, I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor French, second Councillor Stoner. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And our first item of business is a delegation from Fortis BC, Mr. Schoberg. Mr. Schoberg, the floor is yours, and you can introduce your staff.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to provide an overview and an update of the Eagle Mountain to wood fiber gas pipeline project. And I'm just going to try in my fledgling way to get my slide deck. I'm now the presenter. There we go. Look at that. Just bear with me a moment here as so you folks can see. I'm going to just bare my soul here for a minute and actually chug through my inbox. Sorry for the informality here, but I think this is the way to basically get the slide deck. Okay. Can everybody see that okay?
Looks good.
Presentation.
Oh, you want to put it into presentation mode?
Play from the start? How's that? Is that proper?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, good. Once again, Mayor and Council, thank you very much for the opportunity for myself and my colleagues to come and provide an update. It's been almost a year. Although we have had several conversations with staff throughout the year, and we'll update a few of those as we go along here. The colleagues that I have with me are Darren Marshall, the senior project manager for the tunnel component of the project, Vanessa Conley, our senior manager of external relations, and Roxanne Tripp, we call her Roxy. She's the lead for the environment and the regulatory part of EGP. What we'd like to do today is just walk you through a brief introduction to Fortis, the clean growth pathways that we've been working on and are just recently making available to the public, and then start talking about an update to the Eagle Mountain to wood fiber gas pipeline project, the scope of it, what we've been doing since we met with you last, provide a regulatory update, a permitting update, and some of the upcoming events, particularly those that have public interfaces with them. Fortis BC is an investor-owned company. It's a combined natural gas electric utility serving 1.1 million customers throughout British Columbia, 5,200 of whom are in Squamish. We have 2,400 employees, and we serve about 135 communities throughout the province. We've got 49,000 kilometers of transmission and distribution natural gas lines and 7,200 kilometers of transmission and distribution electrical lines. Now, if Vanessa is on the line, I'm going to pass the microphone to her and have her walk through our 30 by 30 and emissions reductions targets.
Thanks, Gord. So Fortis has identified a goal of supporting BC and Canada on our path to meeting 2050 climate objectives. And in 2019, we announced a goal which we're calling 30 by 30. And so that's our intention to reduce our customers' emissions by 30% by the year 2030. And it's really our commitment as well to being a partner on climate action. It's one of the most ambitious emissions reductions targets in the Canadian utility sector today. And we see that as being, there's a path to achieving this target and our longer term targets that utilizes both our gas and electric system infrastructure. As Gord mentioned, Fortis is a deliverer of gas, electricity, propane, and alternative energy around the province. And then I guess just quickly wanted to acknowledge on the topic of climate partnerships that I believe starting next week, there'll be a climate action specialist who will begin working for the District of Squamish on a 2-year assignment that's funded by Fortis BC. And we have a number of these partnerships taking place around the province. And the goal there is for this individual to help advance some of the mutual climate plans and goals between the District of Squamish and Fortis BC. And so Gord, you can move to the next slide. So this slide shows the 4 pillars of our clean growth pathway, and I just wanted to touch on them really briefly today. So in terms of energy efficiency, Fortis is focused on tripling our expenditures on energy efficiency and conservation. So that's to the tune of about $370 million between 2019 and 2022. And these investments include rebates and programs and support new and existing buildings becoming more energy efficiency. We also have a very significant focus on renewable natural gas. So this includes gas that's derived from organic waste and other sources, including wood waste. And by 2030, 15% of the gas that we deliver to our customers around the province will come from renewable carbon neutral sources. We've been focused on increasing our supply and making progress over the last 12 months in terms of developing a number of new supply projects, and anticipate that once our approved projects are up and running, we'll be at 5% of our total throughput of our system, which is a great start as we move along towards that 2030 and 2050 goal. The third pillar here is on global LNG. So there's an opportunity for us to help reduce GHG emissions in sectors that are more challenging to electrify, such as marine shipping. And we've had a focus on marine shipping with some local customers, including Seaspan and BC Ferries. And as well, looking at how we can develop BC into an LNG bunkering hub, which is an economic opportunity for the province and a way to address global GHG emissions in the shipping industry. And of course, Fortis BC, and through our work with our Tilbury LNG expansion, supplies LNG via export to China right now, working with a partner to ship LNG and displace higher carbon fuels overseas. And then the final pillar of our clean growth pathway we've touched on here is zero and low carbon transportation. And so in this space, we've been supporting the expansion of electric vehicles in the passenger market with charging stations and the expansion of alternative fuel vehicles in medium and heavy duty sectors. And so that gives you an overview here of the 4 pillars of our clean growth pathway and our goal to achieving 30% reduction for our customers by 2030. And we'd be happy to chat more about that later today or at a future session with Council. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa, very much. I got a little trigger happy putting to the next slide here. But let's move on to providing a project scope for EGP. Many of you are aware of the project from previous presentations and discussions, but just very quickly and at a high level, this red line overlaid on a Google Maps of the Squamish area shows the pathway of the proposed gas pipeline. 47 kilometers. There will be some works in the Coquitlam end, but we'll just focus on the Squamish end for today. About 6 kilometers of this 47 would be through the town of Squamish. And the alignment closely follows the existing gas pipeline that was installed in 1991 and wanders its way over to the Sunshine Coast and up the Vancouver Island. I wanted to just touch a little bit on the
Uh-oh, I lost one. Did he disappear?
Oh, yeah, it's gone.
Years until 2025. So that's the tunnel piece, and that's the piece from the BC Rail site in town directly over
Let
to.
me just interrupt, Gord, for a sec.
Sure
you
can.
You cut out for a second, so can you go back to the part starting with about 6 kilometers through Squamish? We lost you there for a few seconds.
My goodness, sorry about that. 6 kilometers of the 47 would be through Squamish, and we've been talking with, starting to talk with engineering staff around the coexistence of that gas pipeline along Finch Avenue and Finch Drive, and Industrial Avenue, and just how it would coexist with municipal and other third-party facilities. And so those discussions have begun. So as far as the schedule goes, the tunnel construction, which is from the Squamish Industrial Park, the last 9 kilometers that winds its way over to Woodfibre, the mobilization of equipment would start in the summer of 2022. So we're still a year and a half away. The boring would go from May 2023 to May 2025. So 2 full years for the tunnel construction. The pipeline, again, some of the early works would start around May 2022, construction early 2023, and they would go for 2 years into 2025 as well. The compressor station and the custody transfer station at Woodfibre, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, begin in 2022 and finish in 2025. So just kind of a high level scope and schedule for the project. Whoops, there we go. So in terms of what we've done since we met with you last, workforce accommodation planning. And we held a community table last fall, workforce numbers and the socioeconomic impacts of a large group of construction workers coming into town was a big subject of that session, and we intend following that up, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. This past year, we identified several sites that may work as workforce accommodation sites. We haven't talked to any of the owners, but we did engage with District of Squamish staff, and they were very helpful in providing some comments back to us that once we engage with pipeline and tunnel contractors over the coming month or two, we're going to be talking with them further about their workforce accommodation numbers and needs, and there will be much more to say in the coming few months. We held a public info session on August 12th and 13th, reintroduced the project to the Squamish public, and introduced the Finch Drive preferred route. EA amendments, environmental assessment amendments, filed with the Environmental Assessment Office on October 23rd, and there will be more to share on that in just a moment. In fact, right now, Roxy, over to you to provide a regulatory update. I'm pretty sure she's on the line. Roxy? Listen,
There we go.
There you go. There you go. Okay. You're
Okay.
good.
Everybody can hear me now? Perfect. So,
Yes.
as Gord mentioned, we did submit our amendment application to the EAO last Friday. Now that does initiate an internal process of the EAOs reviewing that document prior to it being truly accepted as complete and ready to enter the EAO process. So you probably won't be seeing it posted publicly for another week as we go through that process with the EAO. The 4 environmental assessment amendments that are included within that amendment application include 2 in the Squamish area, 2 in Coquitlam, and the public comment period, once it's been accepted by the EAO, will be a 45-day public comment period. That's 15 days longer than usual. It's an extended public comment period as opposed to the normal 30. So we'll just go over the Squamish area briefly. There's the Squamish compressor station relocation to the wood fiber property. And so you'll see on this map here, there's a yellow dot, the end of that arrow, and that's where the compressor station would be located. Next slide. There we go. This is a little bit closer up, so you can see kind of the layout of the land. Again, the yellow area is where the compressor station would be located if the amendment is approved. The green area down below, that's the custody transfer station. And so that would be where the tunnel exits. And you'll notice there's a green line going from that custody transfer station up to the compressor. The red line that you see in the map is actually our existing pipeline that brings gas over to Vancouver Island and the Sunshine Coast. All right, next slide. The other amendment that we have in the District of Squamish area is a relocation of approximately 8 kilometers of pipe from the south side of the Snoqualmie Valley over to the north side. So the blue line you see in the map is the approved corridor under our existing environmental assessment certificate, and the yellow line that you see is bringing that corridor over to the north side of the Snoqualmie Valley. And part of the rationale there is to try and avoid some of the sensitive features that would be required in order to build the route shown in blue. Next slide. So our next step is also to apply for an environmental assessment certificate extension. And we intend to submit that application to the EAO this coming Friday. And that would be going through the EAO's certificate extension process, which includes the technical advisory committee, of which District of Squamish is part of. We are also developing the condition management plans, which are 13 plans that we need to develop in relation to our Schedule B conditions. And 2 of those plans are, we've been discussing with District of Squamish, and that's the Community Services and Infrastructure Management Plan and the Traffic Management Plan. So the table of contents has been reviewed by District of Squamish, and we're hoping to move forward with the next steps after the next community table. I think it's back to you,
Thanks,
Gordon.
Roxy. Yeah, thanks very much. In terms of permits, I think you're aware that the Oil and Gas Commission is our other key regulator, apart from the Environmental Assessment Office. In order to apply for a pipeline permit for most of the 47 kilometers, we need to notify residents and landowners that live within 200 meters of the approved Oil and Gas Commission corridor. There's about 350 on the list, and letters together with associated maps will be mailed out to those people along that corridor within the next couple of weeks. So they will see, they will be invited to provide comment if they wish to ourselves at Fortis, to the Oil and Gas Commission, or to both. There will be a 21-day public comment period on that. With respect to the District of Squamish, I mentioned that we've been in discussions with engineering. We're just starting discussions around the alignment of the gas line along Finch Drive, Industrial Avenue. And just something I wanted to bring up, because in some of the questions coming in from the public have, there seems to be some confusion about notification zones or setbacks from the gas pipeline and so forth. I wanted to just lay out these 4 bullets very quickly of different zones of activity around the gas line. The 200-meter zone is an Oil and Gas Commission notification area. That's all it is. And so those are folks that will be mailed the letter that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. 30 meters from the pipe, BC One Call requires anybody excavating to call them. And within 30 meters, the BC One Call will then notify Fortis, and any activity we're interested in, like, for example, blasting, things that could affect the safety of the gas line. We want to be made aware of those so that we can take appropriate measures. Any excavation activity within 10 meters of the pipe requires a Fortis BC permit. And there again, our inspector will come out if it's within 3 meters of the pipe at our cost. The whole idea is to keep the pipeline safe. But as far as setbacks for zoning or building purposes, there are none. And so any development, for example, we're aware that there's discussions around development along Finch Drive. The presence of the existing gas line hasn't affected that. The presence of the new gas line will not affect that. As far as development permits, temporary use permits, again, we're in discussions with planning department and identifying which development and temporary use permits the district believes the project requires. And those discussions have been going on for several weeks. We're getting to the point where we understand which permits will be necessary, and then we can move that forward. So that's a little update on the permits. Darren, waste discharge.
And just if I might interrupt, Mr. Schoberg, this is scheduled to go to 1:45, and I would like to leave as much time as possible for council comments and questions. So I'll just leave you with that thought.
Okay, I'll try and wrap up here.
Yeah, I'll do my best to move through the next couple slides then. I just wanted to spend a couple moments talking about the use of water and the discharge of water during tunneling. On the slide in front of you, you'll see some of the sources of water that will be discharged. Have groundwater during shaft construction, groundwater into the shaft and into the tunnel during tunneling operation, and other sources. But the message that I wanted to leave you with is that the water will be treated, sampled, analyzed, and reported according to the BC approved water quality guidelines prior to discharge. On the water use side, we do need water in order to support tunnel construction. In our original application to the OGC, we applied for the location shown near our existing right-of-way, which you'll see below the approved water withdrawal location. After doing some analysis on the area, we found that there's a saltwater wedge that tends to work its way up during the year just due to natural tides. And so what we're proposing is a new water withdrawal location to the north. And I've also added a picture on the right-hand side, which is really just a skid-mounted water intake, just to show you, just to give you an idea of what that water intake would look like. But again, that's used to support tunnel construction. Back to the water discharge. We are proposing 2 locations. The first is on the north end. This is a storm outfall. So there's an existing stormwater system on the BC Rail site, which discharges at that location. And we're also proposing as an alternative, a location on our existing right-of-way, just to minimize the impact. And at the wood fiber site, similar to the BC Rail site, there will be water that is requiring discharge. And so there's a non-fish-bearing stream which passes through the portal area, which is shown in almost a pink or coral color. And so we would be discharging into that, again, that non-fish-bearing stream.
Thanks, Darren. I think we're pretty much done here. Just the last slide, really, Mayor and Council, to just share a couple of upcoming events that will involve members of the Squamish public or businesses. We're in the process of identifying our pipeline contractor. We're pretty much down to the fine strokes, and likely sometime in the new year, we intend holding a business-to-business networking session with that contractor that's going to include invitations to businesses in Squamish and Indigenous businesses to link them up in order for them to have opportunities to work on the pipeline. We're going to do the same with the tunnel contractor, probably slightly later. Again, working with the Squamish Chamber and other organizations to identify contractors that may want to work on the project. 2 events coming up in the next short while, public information sessions on November 17th and 18th. You'll start seeing those advertised in the Squamish Chief this week. Similar to what we held this past summer, they'll be online. And a community table will be held within the next month to month and a half as well for the Squamish organizations and agencies that kind of represent the health, safety, and social fabric of the community. That's it. And thank you very much again for the opportunity to share with you. We're certainly open to questions, and we'll do our best to respond for the time we have left.
Thank you. And before I go to council, I skipped over one of the items on the agenda, item 3, the ministerial order M192. And I have to recite this staff recommendation that pursuant to ministerial order M192, the District of Squamish is excluding in-person public attendance at this October 27, 2020 meeting on the basis that full public attendance in a manner consistent with public health orders and recommendations cannot be accommodated at this time, and the district is ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability at this meeting by the following means. This meeting is being live streamed. A video of this meeting will be available on the district's website for viewing on an on-demand basis. Do I have a mover of that motion? By Mayor Elliott, second by Councillor French. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. A little housekeeping for us. Thank you. And going to council, the first person I have in the speakers list is Mayor Elliott. Go ahead. And then Councillor Pettengill, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions for clarification. Darren, you mentioned in one of your slides, you said groundwater, but we're actually talking about surface water. You're not pulling it out of the ground, you're pulling it out of the Squamish River. Is that correct?
Sorry, let me clarify. We'd be, when we talk about water that comes into the tunnel, especially in the shaft, that would be groundwater. And so we would just simply be pumping that out of the shaft into our water treatment and discharging into the Squamish River or into the storm system. In terms of water use to support the tunneling operation, we would be pulling from the Squamish River.
Okay, so there's 2 ways that water is coming into the process. And what is the amount that you'll be drawing from the Squamish River?
We've currently licensed approximately 400 meters cubed a day.
400 meters cubed?
Yeah.
A day?
Approximately.
And then what will be done to the discharge water? What sort of treatment, or what are you scrubbing out of it? What's in it before you treat it, and then what's coming out of it, I guess is my question, after treatment.
So in terms of treatment, we're going to have to really rely on the contractor to propose what level of treatment in order to meet the guidelines. But essentially, it's the water that we're talking about discharging is water like precipitation, naturally occurring groundwater, that sort of thing. When we talk about the water use, just to clarify, the water that we're pulling from the river, that'll get mixed with a naturally occurring mineral called bentonite, and that's used to create a slurry. And that's used on the tunnel boring machine on the face to create an even face to facilitate the tunneling operation. And as it's doing that, it's sort of mixing with the soil, and it actually allows us to almost pump the soil back out, and then that gets filtered out. How would I sort of characterize this? Essentially, what comes out of the tunnel is a mixture of native soil underground and that slurry mix, which again is water and bentonite mixed together. And then, because when you're filtering out the soils, naturally you lose some of the water, you lose some of the bentonite. We just top up the bentonite and we top up the water just to continue the tunneling operation. So they're two different systems. So again, the water discharge is really meant to create a dry operating environment in the shaft and in the tunnel. The water supply is really to support the tunneling operations.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. My other question, perhaps this is for you, Gord, is around the Community Services and Infrastructure Management Plan, the Traffic Management Plan. And one of the challenges we've had at the district is that Woodfibre, and I'll ask Woodfibre the same question, Woodfibre is producing their plans, you're producing your plans, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of you guys working behind the scenes to make sure your plans are working with each other. So we're having to do all the interpretation. And I'm wondering if moving forward, there's a way for your plans to reference each other to reduce the workload on our district staff and not make us sort of piece all the pieces together between these two different plans.
That's a good comment, and one we've heard before. Jenna, thank you. I'm going to see if Roxy can join in to make a comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. So we do have a lot of communication with Woodfibre, and we are trying to align our plans. One of the things that we also have to keep in mind is the requirements under the environmental assessment certificate. So I don't know if we can directly reference Woodfibre's plans, but we are trying to align those plans so that they do coordinate with each other. Does that answer your question?
I guess I'm curious about what in the environmental assessment certificate prevents you from referencing each other's plans.
Well, because these plans end up being a compliance tool for the EAO, so we have to make sure that if they are doing a checklist, we're not, or they're not relying on Woodfibre's plan to see if we are being in compliant with our plan. So we can continue that this conversation throughout the development of those plans. And I know that it's a balancing act as to how we can actually meet the requirements of the EAO with the forward thinking towards the compliance aspect of it, as well as make sure that that the projects are aligned in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pittengill, followed by Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. A few things. So the setbacks question was mentioned, Gord. I'm getting a lot of engagement and questions from constituents, including ones that haven't been previously paying much attention to Woodfibre, and they're quite concerned. I understand there aren't regulations in BC, but I think what people are looking for is an understanding of the risk and setbacks to manage risk. In Squamish, we have, to mitigate risk against natural hazards, zoned accordingly, and we have a 1 in 100,000 death annually tolerance for new development and 1 in 10,000 for existing development when we're thinking about what do we do going forward. I see you've worked with Jamar. Fortis has, at least. They do the exact sort of pipeline risk analysis that I'm looking for. So you may not have an answer right here, but what I would like to have is the assessment methodology and the assumptions and numbers for your risk assessment. I know you've claimed that you've assessed the Finch Drive route and you feel it's the best one, but so far I haven't had success in getting the actual hard numbers for you. And I think people are concerned because when I look in Saskatchewan, one of their pipeline companies recommends for a pipeline that's smaller than yours, half the pressure, 140 meter setbacks. In the US, their regulator at a pipeline half your pressure, but the same size, they have 600-foot setbacks, which is 200 meters. And this may be the other place that 200-meter number is coming from. But your pipeline seems to be much higher pressure and really quite big compared to other risk analysis I'm seeing that seem to suggest safety requires quite large setbacks. So if I can make that request, and unless you have the answer right now.
No, I'll make some general comments, Councillor, but I will take that away and we'll get back to you on that. I guess the first analysis we'd look at is what are the requirements of the Oil and Gas Commission, and what are their regulations, the CSA standards that we're required to meet, and there may be some risk assessment built into those CSA standards. I'm going to have to take that away and have a look at that. I'm not familiar with the Saskatchewan and the US setbacks. Those would surprise me if indeed they relate to building setbacks from gas pipelines. But we certainly are familiar with the Oil and Gas Commission. This isn't a national regulated project, so we don't have those regulations. But let me take that away and talk about that. By the way, we do have gas lines, of course, all over the province, in urban areas as well as rural. There are other safety standards that get built into the construction of the gas line when it's in urban areas. Thickness of the wall of the pipe, restriction on the pressure, those types of things. So there's a number of levers that the oil and gas regulations have to ensure the safety of the gas line. But if you don't mind, let me take that back. If you've got any other comments on that right now, that I'd be happy to hear them.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarity, the Alberta and US things, these are not regulations, but these are the various regulators and or pipeline companies. This is their guidance to people developing communities on what is required for safety. And that's what I'm concerned about, is the safety of my community. I'm curious, how much pipeline and other equipment has Fortis purchased for this this project so far?
Very little. Woodfibre still has to issue a final investment decision, which they have not done. So until they do that, we're not at liberty to purchase materials.
Okay.
And so, Darren, you can step in here if you want, but the only thing we've done in terms of advancing our planning is to look at the engagement of the pipeline contractor and the tunnel contractor and continue with our engineering. But as far as purchasing materials go, that has not been done.
Yeah, maybe I can just supplement here, Gord. Been on the project since early 2018, and as far as I'm aware, we've never purchased any materials or any equipment for the project.
Okay, thank you. I have a bunch, but I'll go for one more and then give it up to my colleagues for a bit. It was, the climate crisis, I think, was acknowledged at the start of this presentation, and Fortis's willingness to be a partner in climate action was stated explicitly. I know in the past municipalities have faced legal challenges from Fortis with regards to attempts to regulate or limit gas infrastructure. So I'm curious, given your statement today, if that is also a commitment for Fortis not to further pursue legal challenges against municipalities looking to limit or regulate, otherwise disincentivize new gas infrastructures in communities.
Are you which one are you referring to, just so we can be clear in responding?
Just in the introduction, there was some comments about Fortis's sort of bigger picture, how your commitment to be a partner in climate action. And so I'm asking, what does that commitment actually mean? Does that mean you would not pursue legal action against communities that are trying to limit gas infrastructure?
Okay, I understand the question. Vanessa, do you want to take that, or would you like me to respond?
I think the commitment that we touched on earlier today, so our 30 by 30 commitment, is really looking at how we're able to introduce more renewable and alternative energy sources to our system and help to reduce emissions, and looking at how we can leverage the infrastructure that we do have, not only by delivering natural gas, but by delivering cleaner alternative sources. And so we see that as being, and the infrastructure is still being a key part in achieving our climate goals going forward. And it's about ensuring that we have cleaner fuel sources that can go through that infrastructure going forward as we look to meet our 2030 and 2050 goals.
And sorry, just to clarify, I'm thinking about community's goals. So if a community has a way to go zero emissions, so, you know, and not use that fossil infrastructure, is that a commitment to help communities realize that goal, as opposed to sort of try and in court force them to keep fossil infrastructure in their communities?
I think we're having conversations with communities around the province and wanting to understand what their goals are. And what I touched on today is just the fact that using that infrastructure, it can be done with renewable gas, so it can be done carbon neutral. There's different ways to get to that goal. And so I guess to answer your question, we're having those conversations right now with communities around the province and just seeing how we can partner with them and work with them to achieve their goals, and just recognizing that there's different ways to do that.
Okay, I'll pass my time for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Stoner, then Councillor Herford.
Thank you. Through the chair, picking up on a few questions that the mayor started off on. I was curious
Can you
about
speak
the
up, Councillor Stoner?
Yeah. Interesting that it wasn't an issue earlier today. The wastewater treatment, I'm curious, so appreciate there's a few different moving pieces here, but I'm curious, are you folks then planning on building a temporary wastewater treatment facility, or how do you actually expect to treat the wastewater before it is discharged?
Yes, that's correct. We would have an on-site wastewater discharge treatment facility.
So I'm assuming that would require a development permit of some sort?
Sorry, I had difficulty hearing you. Could you repeat that?
That would require a development permit from the district?
I'm not sure of the permitting requirements for that offhand, but presumably when we will have ongoing discussions with the district to determine all the permitting requirements for our project.
Okay. And then my second question is about, similarly to the mayor's question, in terms of how the requirements for Fortis's management plans line up with Woodfiber's. We've long requested basically a timetable of what management plans are expected when, and what our community's ability is to provide feedback on those management plans, if any, and how they align between the two different projects. And I still have never seen a table of that sort, and I'm curious when we'll get to see that.
Roxy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So that's a good question. We don't have a schedule in place at the moment. From our perspective, we've been waiting to have more information to provide in order to move forward with our CSIMP and our traffic management plan with the District of Squamish. So we can work with Woodfiber and see if there is an opportunity to align those. The projects are different, and they do have some different timelines. So, but that doesn't mean we can't look at that as an opportunity to see if those two approaches can be reviewed at the same time. So I'll take a note here, and I do have a call with Woodfiber's environmental regulatory team this afternoon, so I can bring that up with them then.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I don't think my question is necessarily about ideally where those pieces align specifically in the timeline, but you folks understand what the process is. So you know that A has to happen before B can happen, and then once B happens, C and D can happen, and maybe those are happening simultaneously. But our community doesn't have a broad overview of what all those steps are and how they interact. And so appreciate that those timelines might shift, by 6 months or a few years, depending on decision points. But I think the pushback that I continuously get is trying to understand from our community where do I expect the decision points and where are my opportunities as a community member to provide feedback or understand what the regulatory process is and how those different management plans happen and on a sequential basis. So appreciate you might not have the specific timeline, like they'll start in 2021. But if you have a process orientation, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Herford.
Thank you. My first question is around the in relation to the tunneling, and I appreciate the new information around the water requirements and the proposed solutions to that. One of my concerns is the tunneling spoils, and there's going to be a lot of material. You are probably better situated to tell me how much material, but quite a bit is my math. And where does that go? And what is the plan for that? And I imagine that potentially feeds into some traffic management plan if it has to go somewhere. So could someone comment on that?
Darren.
I can probably comment on that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a substantial volume of tunnel spoils. And we haven't made any firm commitments, but we have been discussing with members of the community, or I guess various businesses, just exploring different opportunities to reuse that material. Right now, no firm commitments.
So to Councillor Stoner's, or along a similar vein, where in the process is that? Should we expect to see that plan? And does that fall outside of the environmental assessment at this point as to where that's material ends up? Is that why there's not a firmer commitment to a plan or a process for that material at this point?
Roxy, I'll rely on you to fill in on the EA piece.
So I guess your question is where the spoils are going and whether or not that's part of the EAO certificate or whether or not that's part of a separate plan. Is that correct?
Sure. That sounds good.
Okay, so the EAO process is usually a kind of a higher level process, and the development of the EAO related plans are usually higher level, the more of a toolbox, and then it's more that next step when you have the contractor on board that you have very specifics. And so we're moving in the direction of having contractors on board to help kind of tighten up the understanding of where things such as spoils will go during construction. It's not necessarily part of the EAO process, but definitely you're correct in assuming that, you know, truck traffic and the kind of the higher level planning as to how things interact within the community are going to be part of the CSIMP and the traffic management plan, which then integrate and help develop the contractors' plans. So I think this comes back to that question as to what the process is and the next steps and how everything fits together. So I think we'll take that away and try and develop kind of some messaging as to how the different processes interact and what timelines are looking like, because I think that might help answer some of these questions.
Maybe I'll just provide a little bit more color. The spoils from the soft ground section have high concentrations of sodium and chloride, which is not unexpected. So it does limit its potential reuse unless it's treated in some way. And then similarly on the hard rock side, we have very actually nice clean rock, but there is some potentially acid generating rock. And so each one of these materials has to be I'm going to say treated, but that's not the right word. You're going to deal with them in different ways, and their reuse is limited according to whether or not it's high concentrations of sodium chloride or potentially acid generating. So we're going to be working in the next couple months to find suitable reuse for these materials if possible. Otherwise, we would need to find a way to dispose of them.
Can I jump in here, because what I hear from several of you is, what is the process? How does the regulatory process interface with the destination of tunnel materials? And I think what Roxy's saying is the traffic control management plan that is a requirement under the EAO is generally a high-level plan. It doesn't contain the detailed traffic management plans that the contractor is going to be required to complete and work with the district around in terms of the destination of tunnel materials. And so there is a sequencing here that I think is going to make sense, but I think what I'm hearing is we need to take that away and provide a sequencing of decision points for you and how they interface with the regulatory process. Does that make sense? We need to get you clarity on how the decision points are going to unfold and where your inputs are going to be for those decision points.
Thank you. And I'm mindful of time, and we've gone a little farther over, but we were a little late starting. But is there anybody that hasn't spoken yet that would like to speak? Any member of council? Being none, I'm going to have to move on. Mr. Schoberg, thank you very much for you and your colleagues for coming, and very helpful. And I'm sure we're looking forward to, there's some additional information coming, and I think we're all looking forward to seeing that, and probably future opportunities to continue the update. Thank you very much.
And thank you for the opportunity. Take care.
And I'll just wait and see if the wood fiber team is on board. You see some names. I think it's Mr. Keane I'm looking for. Is he making the process? Making the presentation? Okay. There we are. Mr. Keane, are you ready to go? You're muted.
There we go.
Go ahead, the floor is yours. And you could introduce your colleagues if you want.
Okay, and my colleague that's going to be joining me is our operations director, Andrew Brown. So he'll be joining this afternoon. So you were Elliott, acting Mayor Race, councilors, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And thank you very much for inviting Woodfibre to participate with this council meeting. Before I begin, I do want to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional territory of the Squamish people, and I want to thank them for hosting us, as well as for strong support for the Woodfibre project. Now, I've got a presentation that to try and but unfortunately, it's not letting me share anything.
Should be able to now. He's got the ball.
There we go. There we go.
You should be able to, as far as I'm told.
Okay.
But I'm not the expert in these things. There we go. It's starting to come out.
I'm not sure what I'm sharing right now, so.
Right now it's a blank page.
Can you see this, or am I just looking at the presentation myself?
Just you. I've just got a black page.
Okay, let me try this again. let me close the number of my windows here. Apologize. Let me stop sharing, Councilor Rice, and let me try to get this corrected. Here we go. There we go. Now, can you see this?
Now it's coming up.
Okay.
And I think you want to get into presentation mode. Got a whole bunch of other stuff on the screen as well. There we go.
Okay. So everybody, I hope everybody can see this. So now I'm trying to advance it, but nothing seems to be happening. Here we go. So this afternoon, I'm going to cover 3 different sections. One, an update on the community engagement that we've done since the beginning of this year. An update on emissions and my thoughts with regards to net zero. And then finally, construction and regular progress that we've made this year. Now, importantly, our project is the cleanest, lowest greenhouse gas emitting LNG facility in the world. It'll set new record standards for clean natural gas exports. Our site's access to renewable electricity means that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% versus what they would have been had we used gas-fired compression to liquefied gas. WLNG is also the first company in Canada to recognize a First Nations government as a regulator on a proposed project and receive an environmental from an Indigenous people. We have meaningful changes to the project based on community and local First Nations consultation. For example, we changed the technology we use to cool the liquefaction plant because of the environmental agreement with the Squamish Nation. And recently, we an amendment to our environmental assessment to house construction workers in a flotel to address community concerns regarding the availability of at-market housing. Our project is also expected to create more than 600 construction jobs and over 100 operational jobs with hiring preferences given to Squamish Nation members, Squamish residents, British Columbians, and Canadians in that order. With regards to community engagement, in 2020, despite being in the middle of a global pandemic, we've seen our highest level of community engagement since 2016. And if you look at the chart that graphically shows how we've increased the community consultation. With regards to touch points, we've 39 outreach or touch points since the beginning of this year with community members, whether it's through chambers of commerce or Rotary clubs or individual. We've been working to stay in front. With regards to the meetings with the district, with meetings with Mayor Elliott, with councilors and staff, we've had 32 meetings. And then we've also sent out 17 new this year. So we've been, I think, trying to step up our with not only the community, but also with the council. Into 2021, or I should say, finishing off 20, we're going to have 2 public information sessions that will be held on November 23rd. And those virtual. We'll also have a community table that will be held on November 26th. As we go to the end of the year and go into Q1, we'll be hosting more community tables as well as more information sessions. Now, all of this is also in conjunction with the work that we've been doing, the outreach we've been doing through our social media, also with our advertising on Mountain FM as Squamish Chief. And emissions in our environmental work. If you look at the chart on the upper left, and I've used the 7 benchmark since based on the BC government's regulations and laws, 2007 is the benchmark year by which you're looking at reducing your greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. So that's just an arbitrary choice for using that. But if we were starting in 2007, or if we developing this 2012, when we were actually looking at it, we were planning to use gas drives to liquefy the natural. Our would have been around 630,000 tons, 680,000 tons. Adapter of going to all electric, that climate is a significant. We recognize that greenhouse gas is a significant issue, and so back in 2014, we made the decision to be all electric. This reduced our greenhouse gas emissions 142,000, and that 142,000 tons also includes 12,000 tons from BC Hydro. We took the same strategy that we did. That's what actually published in our environmental certificate. We looked at in 2020 the technology. We looked at the gas stream, the amount of CO2 that's actually gas stream. Back to 2014 submission or 2015 submission EAO environmental. We assumed, or I should say, our consultants assumed that the gas or CO2 entrained in the gas would be about 2%. So that's what the plant is designed to handle, and that's very, very abnormal. What the average CO2 entrained in the gas actually is, and what it's forecast to be over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, and that's significantly lower, which has reduced our greenhouse gas emissions forecast from the 142 to 68,000. And that 68,000 tons also includes 12,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions from BC Hydro. What this does, and what this does for our facility, is we've reduced the emissions for our plant 2020 from 2015 by 52%. This gives us an factor of 0.03. And if you look at the average LNG export facility today that's in operation around the world, they're about 0.36. If you look at the new facility developed in the U.S. Gulf Coast, those are around 0.2, I'm sorry, 0.22 to 0.24. You look at the greenhouse legislation in British Columbia, the requirement is 0.16. LNG Canada is 0.115, and we will be at 0.03. This will, in fact, be the emitting cleanest liquefaction facility anywhere on this planet. And we also recognize that that's not enough for us. We've begun thinking, how do we get to net zero? Which, in my view, it's an important target to try to hit. But I'm not sure how we're going to get there, and that's why I have this proposal down in the lower left of the page here. Is I'm suggesting that form a roundtable and asking Mayor Elliott if she would lead or creating a table that would include senior business leaders in Squamish, senior environmental leaders, academics, and industry to come together and discuss how do we in Squamish achieve the objective of 2050. And I think that's an important point. It's also a point that I plan on making with Premier Horgan around how do we as a province do this, and then also how do we as a country achieve these objectives. So if you look at the graph on the right, the little yellow circle there shows where wood fiber is in relation to other existing industrial projects in British Columbia. Now, in terms of up and the environmental work we've done at site, we've spent around $13 million on site cleanup. And if you look at the chart on the right, or the graph on the right, it shows that we've pulled 4,000 old creosote-covered pilings out of Howe Sound. We've done an awful lot of work around cleaning up of the site, and we've also found over 400 old tires that were buried at the site. So there's a tremendous amount of work that's ongoing with regards to the site cleanup and in looking at the environmental degradation that occurred when this site was a pulp and paper mill for the last 100 years. So we've done a tremendous amount of work, and I'm happy to say that as a result of some of that work, we are now seeing herring coming back into Northern Howe Sound. We're seeing sea lions coming back, as well as the orcas are coming back. So we've done a lot of work. There's a lot more to do, as you can see in the lower left, as we go into 2021. Construction planning and the regulatory side of this. In terms of the timeline, we're hoping to finalize our EPC, our engineering, procurement, and construction contract within the coming weeks. I think many of you know that our EPC contractor is McDermott. We've remained in discussions with them. We're now, like I said, in the process of hopefully finalizing that contract, and hopefully that will be signed within the coming weeks. Our financing for the project was completed in September, so that was a major milestone that we've completed at that time, and we're targeting construction to start in Q3 of 2021. In terms of site activity this year, there's no major work planned for the remainder of 2020, although we do have a number of continuous work activities that will take place at the site, such as maintaining their power generation and then also our leachate plant. Now, in terms of regulatory, as many of you know, we do have an IBA, an impact benefit agreement with the Squamish Nation. We also have a signed term sheet with the Tsleil-Waututh. We are in discussions and negotiations with regards to our impact benefit agreement with the Tsleil-Waututh. We are in the process of developing our management plans, and I was able to listen in, on Fortis's discussion and some of the questions that Mayor Elliott and Councillor Stoner had with regards to management plans, and I absolutely agree we have to get together and synchronize our management plans. So that is high on our list, and we're having a number of internal meetings with with local stakeholders, with First Nations, as per the District of Squamish's 7-step process. I think many of you saw that our environmental certificate extension request was approved. We received notice of that yesterday. It was actually approved on Sunday. And not least is our Flotel amendment, which it continues to be with the BCEAO, and we hope to finalize this within the next several months. In terms of course, when we get to the height of our construction activity, there should be over 600 workers at the site. Now, this will include some of the Fortis workers as well. So we'll have about 500 wood fiber constructors, people working on the plant, along with about 100 to 150 or so that are working at the site with relation to the tunnel. And then we'll begin operations in late 2025. That's the best. In terms of economic activity, new investment for Squamish during what I think is a very challenging economic situation in COVID-19. Our facility, when it's operating, will provide roughly $540 million a year in annual expenditures in local operations, and 100% of this will be spent in the Sea to Sky corridor, so in the Lower Mainland, Vancouver, up through Squamish and into Whistler. A lot of that will go to salaries, maintenance that we'll have to do, as well as gas purchases, which will primarily go to the northeastern part of the province. And jobs, we've had a lot of interest from people that live in Squamish, such as this gentleman here, in terms of people that have had to work in the oil sands in Alberta or in northern British, looking to be able to remain at home and not have to travel week in and week out to find work. So this is something that we're seeing a lot of interest in, and it's clearly something that, as I mentioned earlier, our goal is to hire locals first, then British Columbians second, and Canadians third. In terms of what we've done with regards to the community, we've contributed over $1 million in local charities. That work will continue. We're also offered our housing that we have currently to the district in terms of finding needed places for first responders to stay when this pandemic first broke out. We've also provided housing support for 2020 wildfire victims. So again, we want to be more than just in Squamish. We also want to be a good corporate citizen in Squamish. And there's more activities planned for the remainder of this year. So in conclusion, we want to build on our increased engagement going forward. So there will be more community tables, there'll be more public information sessions. These will be, I think, very important not only for the community, but also for us in learning and hearing more from the community of what the concerns are and can help either mitigate those or allay concerns. Maintaining global corporate leadership through groundbreaking work. And I can't emphasize enough the groundbreaking work in terms of what wood fiber has done concerning greenhouse gas emissions. And I didn't even mention the fact that when we start selling LNG and transporting LNG to the Asian economies, the amount of greenhouse gases that will be reduced as a result of replacing either coal or oil for electricity generation, for industrial industrial uses or residential use will significantly reduce greenhouse or air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions in Asia. And it's also helpful, I think, to remember that a lot of those emissions that are produced in Asia blow on top of us. So we can't ignore the fact of in a global community. And then also the way we've consulted with our First Nations partners. This was something that no other company had done, and it's a unique way of entering into and partnering with First Nations. And then getting to construction, recognize the importance of the District of Squamish. We recognize the importance of the council and working closely with you and with staff to bring this project to close. So, and that's it. So now I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Keane. Council Pettengill.
Thank you. Mr. Keane, I just want to ask about security and how you plan to keep our community safe. I mean, we've seen the gondola be compromised twice. I think compared to slow-moving ships along the shoreline, I mean, it's been one of the criticisms is this is a poor location, especially from a security perspective, because those ships are so exposed, and I think more exposed than the gondola. So, you know, I think last time we spoke, I pushed you on this, and where we got to is that you would, you know, do what the law requires, but I would like to try again. How will you actually keep us safe given the exposure of where you're located, and in particular for the ship traffic?
Well, Councilor Pettengill, thank you for the question. I think that's an important question. I think many of you, many of the councilors know that these ships are going to be supported by tugs coming up Howe Sound. So they're only be 8 knots, and they'll have, again, they'll be escorted. So the risk of engine failure on the vessel and it either crashing into something is very slim, unless the tugs also lose power. So that's one way to mitigate some of the concerns. With regards to a terrorist attack, and I recognize I'm concerned about terrorist activity in Squamish, and it concerns me for the health and safety of my employees. It concerns me about the health and safety of the facility. And if you look at an LNG vessel, they're very robust vessels. We did a study when back 2004 or 5, when I was with British Gas, in terms of terrorist activities around an LNG ship. First of all, they have a very high freeboard, meaning the level from the water line up to the deck is it's 40, 50 feet. So it's difficult for somebody to come up beside the vessel in a rowboat and climb up on board the vessel. Secondly, if somebody were to come up with a boat bomb, based on what I've seen, you would have to have actually 2 boats with 2 bombs. So you'd have one that would blow a hole in the outer hull of 15 or so meters, 15 to 30, and then you have to have another vessel that would immediately go in follow that boat in and blow up inside the vessel itself. Or you could fly a jetliner into it. But they're robust vessels, and the likelihood of a LNG is extremely slim. So even if it got hit by a missile, and there was an LPG, which is much more volatile than LNG, ship that was hit by a missile in the Middle East about 2 decades ago, and it didn't blow up. So it's difficult to see how an LNG ship could have a catastrophic failure when you look at the fact that tugs that will be in these vessels Howe Sound and up to the site, and will be remaining with the vessel until she departs. We're very concerned with safety, and I just don't see that as a practical something that will practically happen.
Okay.
Can I maybe just add to that the shipping record of LNG is second to none, and that includes operating in hostile environments, in and out of Yemen, Strait of Hormuz, Pakistan. So that there is operational experience as to how to keep these vessels safe, even when those threats exist. Now, those are precautions that I wouldn't envisage being necessary in Howe Sound. If situations change, you can start to consider those things, but there is an excellent record, including in much more hostile environments than right here.
Yeah, thank you.
I think following on that point, sorry, Councillor Pellico, but following on to that point, commercial shipping of LNG started in 1964, and there's never been a significant loss of cargo or a significant incident involving an LNG carrier in the 56 years of commercial operation.
Yeah, I think I just, again, like to highlight, no one would expect what's happening to the gondola to happen. It seems you have an unusual proximity to the shore in terms of your ships, and it seems that the majority of communities don't support your project right now. So I think, there are circumstances that give reason to be concerned about safety. I'll move on to another topic, though.
Just Benville, I'll cut you off and go to Councillor Stoner.
Okay.
You can come back. You're muted. You're muted, Councillor Stoner.
She's moved her phone to the audio, so she's troubleshooting.
If Councillor Stoner is speaking, I can't hear her.
Yeah, she's on a second Tori's trying to get her, I think.
Councillor Stoner, hold on for a sec. We're just hooking you up to your...
No, it would be... Okay, try now, Councillor Stoner.
Can you try it now,
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Good.
There we go.
Much better.
I called in using my phone, but I wasn't elevated to a panelist yet. Thank you, through the chair. My question is similar to one that I posed to Fortis, which is, I'll start in the first part. David, you spoke about community engagement and community roundtables in November, as did the previous presenters from Fortis. And so I'm curious how those are coordinated in any way, or if those are just a duplication across requests for our community time.
I think that's a very good question, and they should be coordinated. We both, I know that fiber perspective, we need to do a better job of coordinating with Fortis, and that is something I will stress with my team, that we work with them. So, but I don't want to delay the upcoming community engagement activities that are going to take place in November. But we will certainly look at how we do this as we go into Q1, so that we coordinate what we're doing. And I agree, a lot of people are too busy to attend too many of these either roundtables or community. So you have my commitment that we will work more closely with Fortis on that.
Thank you. That's encouraging to hear, because I would say just generally, I'm definitely hearing from folks that they are starting to feel a little bit burnt out, especially from the virtual engagement side of things. And I think it's something that I've been giving a lot of thought to from just the perspective of us at the district, how we continue to engage, given that people are just spending more time online. So I was cognizant when I saw the back-to-back presentations that there's back-to-back requests for virtual engagement from these two companies. And then my second piece of this question is more broadly in terms of what our community can expect in terms of a timeline of process for the various management plans that we know are forthcoming between the two projects. And if we can get a commitment from you to coordinate, not necessarily recognizing that there's variability in these timelines, but coordinate on an understanding of what the process is for management plan A comes before management plan B, and what these management plans are and what the outcomes for each of those management plans are expected to be, and which ones have opportunity for public engagement, if any?
No, and again, I listened to your comments or questions earlier, Councillor Stoner, and I agree. And we're following the 7-step process as promulgated by the District of Squamish. So we are doing that, and I do think that we need to sit down with Ford and look at our management plans. Particularly, I think traffic management plan is a good one. Our greenhouse gas management plan, which is something that we've agreed to as a result of the extension of our EAC extension, is due separately. But there are some of these plans where we need to work together on making sure that we're communicating with the district and with the community in terms of how we're going to manage all of this.
Okay, I'll just go to myself and then back to Councillor Pettengill, seeing no other hands. And I'm just curious, Mr. Keane, if there's a goal for your final investment decision.
Councillor Rice, yes, thank you. Our goal is Q2 for a final investment decision. Now, I'll back up and explain why we're where we are. As you recall, our EPC contractor, McDermott, had some financial issues, entered into Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in January of this year. They worked those, came out of bankruptcy protection in July with a very strong balance. So we decided to continue with McDermott. So McDermott will be the EPC contractor. Again, we're closing in on the final weeks of negotiations with them to finalize the contract. PCL out of Edmonton and out of Richmond will be our actual contractor that will put the modules together when they arrive. So our FID is looking at Q2, probably early summer, and with a construction starting in Q3.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill, I'll go back to you, and I don't see other hands at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the engagement piece, you had a chart that seemed to show an uptick in engagement, but I don't recall any truly public open engagements in the last couple of years at least, and I don't see anything in your plans going forward for that. And I think, there is a lot of mistrust. I think, some of the claims even in this presentation are challenging for people to accept. And so there's a real demand to understand and to question in an open forum where there's some accountability. So, has there been any of that truly open, everyone's invited public engagement over the last couple of years? And can you confirm? I think there hasn't. What are the plans for that going forward? And not just information, but actual being able to drill down and sort of talk back and forth and get an understanding.
In the last couple of years, Congressman, sorry about that, Councillor Pettengill. In the last couple of years, no, we have not had, to my knowledge, a robust engagement with the community. That's what we're going to be doing on the 23rd and 24th of this month, of November, is having a robust where we can accept up to 500 people participating in the discussion. And to be frank, the discussion is going to be open as long as people are careful about what they're saying and stuff. I think we want it to be open. We want to address the community. And I think what we've got a very good story to tell. I think we've got a very good story to tell on greenhouse gas emissions and how we've reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And I think we have a very good story to tell in terms of how we've worked with our First Nation partners. And so as Chief Ian Campbell said at a conference earlier this year before we all went into lockdown, when he was talking about wood fiber, and he was talking about free, prior, and informed consent and reconciliation, he said that wood fiber, and this is a quote, wood fiber it has not participated in reconciliation, they're participated in reconciliation. So we've actually put our money where our mouth is in terms of actually working with First Nations to make sure that they have a true representation in terms of the project. Squamish Nation is, as a result, one of the 3 regulators that we have of this project. So yeah. I'm looking forward to having these community meetings. I think it's important. And as we get into moving into 2021, we get closer final investment decision and construction, I think they're even going to be more important.
So you mentioned reconciliation. I wasn't going to talk about this, but don't you think it's problematic that the province makes some of the benefits of its agreement contingent upon the nation pursuing the project? I mean, to my mind, reconciliation is we are on unceded territory. We've been having the benefits of that unceded territory, and yet we make benefits to the nation contingent on acceptance of a project before we actually dealt with reconciliation. I mean, don't you think that actually works against reconciliation? And you know, reconciliation should be unconditional?
I think that's a question you need to ask the and Squamish Nation.
Okay. I guess.
Well, stop just for a second, Councillor Pettengill. Are there any other councillors who would like to speak? We're going to be about another 5 minutes at the most. Go ahead, Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, so I guess one, and this is a bit more curiosity, but why do we keep referring to, you know, your emissions are lower than if you'd used gas? So, you know, comparing emissions to some hypothetical thing that never existed, what we have to get to is zero emissions, right? And we know we have to get to 45 of where we are in 2010 by 2030. And so those are our targets. And we know from the IEA, International Energy Association, that renewable energy in China is now cheaper and faster to deploy. And so, you know, why are we talking about, oh, well, it's better than oil and gas when we know for the same amount of money, we could get more energy and cleaner energy instead of LNG? So why are we comparing to sort of the past as opposed to the future where we need to be and picking the best path to where we need to be?
Well, I think you're right that renewables are growing in China, but gas demand is also growing in China. There has to be something that balances out the renewables. And I would say that, you know, something I saw from the Manhattan Institute a while ago was that if wind could supply half of the world's energy, it would still require about 2 billion tons of coal for footings and steel towers, and it would require about 1.5 billion barrels of oil for the blades. So renewables really are extremely important. And everybody recognizes that. We recognized it from 2014. We were, I think, took a leadership position saying that climate change, greenhouse gas emissions have to be, and that's the reason why we went all electric. And so the chart that I had there with the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we've had we gone all gas is important because that was what we were doing. And we didn't do it. So we didn't produce or wouldn't produce 30 tons. And then we said, all right, let's look at in our environmental assessment, if we're all, and we have the gas coming into the facility contains 2% CO2, which would be, by the way, the amount of CO2 that comes in our plant will be the same amount of CO2 that comes into your house, natural gas, or into your pub or whatever. So if you look at so that was 142,000, including 12,000 tons from hydro. So now we're down to 68,000, including 12,000 hydro. We're working in the right direction. And at the end of the day, if you look at the IPCC requirements, I mean, those requirements are on nation states. They're not on individual projects. And we have more than met the requirements of the British Columbia government and of the federal government. And so I think, you know, and that's why I suggested that it would be important for the district to pull together a roundtable and have a roundtable discussion so that we're all talking together about how we achieve a net zero by 2050. Because my fear is that we're continuing the way we're continuing today in a lot of spheres, we'll be talking past each other. We won't be talking, and my goal is how do we actually do this? And it's something I think is important. When I was on the climate leadership team under the previous under the last, it was something that I recognized and then that we have to do more to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'm proud to say that Woodford is actually walking the talk, and it's actually doing it.
I have to respectfully disagree there, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, I respect your opinion, and that's why we need to have these conversations.
Okay, and I'm once again mindful of time and seeing nothing further. Thank you very much, Mr. Keene, and your team for coming and the update, and look forward to future updates as issues arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Council, this is a recess moment, so we will recess till 2:45. Thank you, and welcome back. I'll call this meeting back to order. The next item is item 4 sub 3, District of Squamish COVID-19 EOC response and adaptation resources update. Ms. Latimer and Ms. Kidney, go ahead. No, I think she's just putting her program up. No, you're muted, Ms. Latimer.
Is she on a phone? Megan, do you have a phone for your audio? What are you using for audio?
We can see you, but we can't hear you.
If she has a cell phone, she could call in on the.
No, the suggestion was you could call in on your phone to the link. Hmm.
Should we swap the items and move to Mr. Pickett?
Is he available?
Yeah, he's on. He's actually on, and we could swap items that way. She can troubleshoot Megan.
He's disappeared. Hang on a sec. Oh, I thought I heard something.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, my apologies. I'm sorry, my computer is not cooperating this afternoon. And I'll just double check. Can you see my presentation? I don't see it showing up on my side.
Well, there's something up here, but it's a bunch of instructions.
Okay, hang on. My apologies.
Now she's disappeared. Oh.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My apologies for the technical difficulties. Our fire hall Wi-Fi is a little bit spotty, and my computer as well. For the record, my name is Megan Latimer. I'm the Emergency Program Officer for the District of Squamish, and I have with me here today Keely Kidner, the District's Research and Projects Coordinator, and Jenny Small, the Human Resources Coordinator and Occupational Health and Safety Specialist for the District. Today, we are here to provide you with an update and overview of 3 of the COVID-19 pandemic response and adaptation resources that have been developed by staff. We have the Pandemic Response Plan, the Pandemic Playbook, and the COVID-19 Safety Planning resources. So we've used an integrated planning framework to develop these resources in order to ensure that our strategies, plans, and our overall approach fit together to properly meet the many needs of this pandemic emergency. Just to give you an overview of these 3 resources, the Pandemic Response Plan outlines at a very high level how the pandemic response should be structured. And this is really mainly targeted at Emergency Operations Center personnel. However, it does provide insight for all staff in terms of how a pandemic event will be managed by the district. The Pandemic Response Plan focuses on response activities, and it broadly describes the district's business continuity and staff safety approach. However, it refers to these other 2 documents that we're going to discuss here today, the Pandemic Playbook and the COVID-19 Safety Plans, as the specific operational documents on those subjects. The Pandemic Playbook is the district's main resource for explaining how the district ensures business continuity and critical service delivery during a pandemic-like emergency. And the playbook is really targeted at district staff and describes the different adaptations that each department undergoes at different stages or phases of a pandemic. And then finally, the 3rd document we're going to discuss here today is the COVID-19 safety plans and safety planning resources, as well as some of the different tools that have been developed to ensure the safety of staff and the public in all of the district's different workspaces. These are very much operational resources and will continue to be updated as new information regulations are introduced. I just want to touch a little bit more in detail on the Pandemic Response Plan and what it looks like inside. The Pandemic Response Plan will be an annex to the district's Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, which already describes the district's standardized approach to all types of emergencies, not just pandemics. The Pandemic Response Plan will outline in more detail some of the advanced planning activities that will take place before a pandemic emergency impacts the community. So things such as liaising and coordinating with the health authorities, identifying potential equipment and PPE supply issues, updating business continuity and safety plans. It also is going to define the activation criteria and triggers for when we open an emergency operations center. And it discusses the roles and responsibilities of the different agencies and stakeholders that are involved in pandemic response. It will detail the different response actions of the district's EOC, Emergency Operations Center, and it'll also include considerations for implementing a virtual EOC and how this impacts some of the processes, communications, and decision-making structures. Just to show you in a bit more detail some of the different response actions that we've included. We've seen a number of different response actions that the district has been responsible for during this COVID-19 pandemic. Some that were expected beforehand in terms of what we would expect for any pandemic emergency, and some that have emerged as the needs of the pandemic have progressed. We've made the effort to document these and include them in the pandemic response plan so that we can ensure they're included as considerations for future pandemics as well. Some of these response actions include how the district has supported the health response. So for example, with the setup of the COVID assessment sites or mass vaccination clinics. Also how our bylaw and RCMP officers have assisted with implementing and enforcing provincial health officer orders and also orders under the state of provincial emergency. We also outline how the district connects community members with the information resources they need on things like health matters, economic assistance for businesses and individuals, and other issues like coping and mental health. The pandemic response plan is currently being reviewed, and we expect to finalize it in the coming days. As we continue to progress throughout this pandemic, any new learnings or changes are going to be incorporated into this plan. I'm now going to pass you over to Keely Kidner, who will provide some more detail on the pandemic playbook for business continuity, as well as some of the other adaptation initiatives that she's been working on.
Thanks, Megan. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, so I'm Keely and I'm the Research Projects Coordinator, and as Megan mentioned, for the last few months I've been supporting the emergency response team here by developing the pandemic playbook. And I just want to say, don't worry, you're not supposed to be able to read what's on that slide, so don't strain your eyes too much. I'll be talking through it. So the purpose of the pandemic playbook is to provide a high-level overall structure to guide adaptations that are required in the event of a pandemic-like emergency. And this is based on staff interviews with various departments, which have been analyzed to understand how each department has adapted to deliver continued service throughout the pandemic. And during the analysis, it did become clear that each department adapted in unique ways, not necessarily based on the phases, because departments have different models of service delivery. So we therefore categorize the departments into 4 different structure types, and I'll show you some examples now. So the first is the phase structure, and this is where adaptations have been determined. Oh, sorry, Megan, if you can go back one. Adaptations have been determined by different phases as dictated by BC's restart plan. So as you can see, we have color-coded the phases to match the restart plan, so it's more accessible and easy to read. And on the left, the first grid there is outlining different areas of service delivery and then different adaptations depending on which phase we are in. And on the right, the top grid explains the minimum staffing and key functions. So this outlines which staff are working on site and which are working remotely during each phase. And then finally, the bottom table on the right determines the redundancy of key positions for those departments that need it. And this example is the Squamish Fire Rescue. So this informs how many staff are trained to step in when folks in key positions fall sick and need to self-isolate. We can turn to the next slide. Another structure that we determined was the adapted service structure. So in this structure, adaptations are made to the method of service delivery, but the nature of the services are not really affected or very minimally so. So in many cases, departments that fall under this structure made initial operational changes when the emergency began and then maintained these throughout its duration. So again, on the left, we have a description of the service adaptations that have been made. And on the right, we have the staffing adaptations. And mostly this involves staff moving to remote work and using virtual meetings or having limited meetings with safety protocols in place if they were going to meet in person. Next slide, please. Another structure that we identified was a support structure. So this is where service adaptations are made to provide emergency support across the organization. And these are departments that are supporting other departments. So in most cases, this involved additional services and staffing to aid other departments' responses during the most intense parts of the emergency. As the intensity eases, departments under this structure provide regular services plus support for the new adapted work environment. So on the left, we have a continuum to represent the intensity of the emergency, and that's the arrow. And then staffing adaptations are listed here as well, starting with all staff working remotely with virtual meetings and then gradually moving to more regular levels of staffing. On the right, we have a pyramid structure to show how support is adapted through different stages of the emergency. We begin at the top with a triage at the most intense stage, and then move through emergency support and then support for an adapted work environment as the intensity of the emergency lessens. And here, as an example, we have human resources department. So what this means in triage are things like making sure that occupational health and safety is looked after, that there's compliance with all legislation. And as we move in through more different types of support, we're looking at longer term policies and things like that. The final stage is adaptive recovery once the threat of the emergency subsides. and we are not quite there yet. Next slide, please. Thanks, Megan. So the final structure that we identified was a public facility structure, and this is where adaptations are made to services and staffing depending on the status of specific buildings or facilities. So in contrast to the phase structure, adaptations are adjusted not as a result of changes in phase per se, but rather in response to the building's staged reopening. In this example, you can see that there are some adaptations made while the building is closed to the public, and this is under the red columns. And then different adaptations once it opens under the gray column. And the structure differentiates between access and service, recognizing that departments operating out of certain buildings were still delivering public service even though the building was closed. And we've also taken into account that some buildings were open for emergency public access and then adapted for staff access at later times. And there are some buildings or departments that differentiated a little bit between the public facility structure and the phase structure, and some of them look very similar, but decided to go with the phase structure. So we're really following the lead of different departments to find out what's going to work for them and make the most sense to them. Next slide, please. So we developed a lot of other adaptation initiatives throughout this process, and we've been doing so through engagement with staff across the organization and doing some needs analysis. And this has led to a couple of other projects that I'd like to mention. Although staff are meeting virtually and we are encouraging virtual meetings at this time, there has been some need identified for private and safe meeting spaces for those moments when in-person meetings are needed. So we've developed some meeting guidelines, and we're in the process of finalizing some spaces, including the Municipal Hall courtyard, which will be covered with a large tent to allow for outdoor meetings throughout the winter period. And you can see a mock-up there. We've also identified the need for a connection between council and staff to help deal with logistics, such as equipment and network connections. We've created an emergency council liaison role, which will go into effect during emergencies to make sure that council is receiving timely and pertinent information. And this will not replace the EOC director or CIO, but rather supplement to troubleshoot any logistical issues that arise from an emergency. We've been working with staff to find out what issues are arising for them. So we've completed a general survey earlier this summer to see what issues are coming up. We then conducted a more interactive survey using the platform Thought Exchange to learn about the thoughts of staff caring for people at home during this time. And the feedback from both of these types of engagement are going to help inform our planning as we move forward. A final long-term project to come out of the COVID adaptations and staff engagement is optimization planning. And in this, we will be analyzing our response across the district for possible long-term changes in alignment with strategic vision and goals. So in this way, we're hoping to capture and rebuild and build upon the innovations that staff have developed in response to the pandemic to make sure that we're able to achieve our strategic goals. And I'll now pass it on to Jenny.
Hi, can everyone hear me all right? Yep, okay. Yeah, so I'm Jenny, and I just recently started just in August as the HR and Occupational Health and Safety Coordinator. And so a key function of my new role at the District of Squamish is to help streamline health and safety activities and to advise and support workplaces and departments. So in consultation with HR and the Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee, we developed a organizational level COVID-19 exposure control plan. And so this provides a single resource for the District of Squamish for anything that affects all District of Squamish employees and workplaces. This also allows the individual workplaces to kind of narrow their focus and to monitoring and updating their specific areas only. We have been reviewing all the current COVID-19 safety plans at the workplaces to make sure they are updated and monitoring for their effectiveness. We've also been continuing to share ideas via the Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee across all the departments and workplaces. Megan, you can move to slide 2 or next slide. Thank you. So we've also updated the COVID-19 employee information page with resources for all employees on how to deal with a variety of situations from symptoms to exposures. On this page, we have all of the COVID-19 safety plans, including workplaces, programs, and related COVID-19 safe work practices, along with links to industry recommended guidelines. We have been communicating the update to the COVID-19 employee information page out to employees, and the feedback so far has been positive, that it's been a helpful resource. We have also created an internal tracking system to monitor COVID-19 employee situations with a strong focus on confidentiality. This ensures that we can react proactively if we are experiencing an increased risk in any area. We are continually reviewing and monitoring our plans, provincial health orders, guidelines, and cases so that we can pivot and adjust as required. The pandemic playbook will be an essential tool to reference on how COVID-19 activities may shift in different workplaces so that we can plan ahead accordingly. So that finalizes our presentation. And so I'll put it back to Mayor and Council if anybody has any questions for us.
Thank you very much. Council. Mayor Elliott.
Thank you for this update. So a couple of questions. Maybe one for you, Megan, but is there any thought of stockpiling some PPE in the district after we've confronted this emergency, keeping track of it, using it, and replenishing it so that we always have perhaps a little bit more than we need?
Yeah, through the mayor. It's an excellent question. I mean, I think, what this pandemic has revealed is that it certainly is advantageous to have some extra stockpiles available. Since we've had access to the supply chains again for PPE for staff, I know that managers have been looking at that and ensuring that we do have some extra going into the fall and winter season. But certainly for our future planning, I think that would be a very good thing to consider in terms of having those extras on hand. And I think, as we get into potentially another pandemic in the future, we would certainly want to be learning from this one and having those resources available.
And then maybe, Jenny, for you, is that staff information page you just showed us. Mm-hmm. I wonder if it's possible to create something similar on Council's page, only because it is not out of the realm of possibility that someone might find themselves with symptoms and they have been in City Hall or at a meeting with someone else. And so you've beautifully laid out all the protocols and sort of the checklist for staff, but then what about me? I've been here all day. What if tomorrow I wake up with a fever and a cough? So what do? I would actually phone Linda in a panic, but maybe you would rather me do something else. And so I think, if there's some sort of resource that could go on our SharePoint page, that's a place for us to go if we have questions, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely, I can definitely transfer the appropriate and make some modifications to anything that's related to council specific. So yeah, that's a great suggestion, and I can definitely, I'm still learning all the ins and outs, so I wasn't quite aware there was a full council page. So once I get directed to that, I can make some information on there.
Yeah, thanks. And I really appreciate, Keely, you mentioning that council liaison role, because I think sometimes in our effort to make sure that our staff are well taken care of, we forget about the 7 people that serve in this capacity. And we have questions too, because we don't want to screw up. So anyway, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner, and then Councillor French.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you so much to staff for this presentation. It's great to see all the work that's going into capturing the learnings that we've gone through over this, what feels like a very long time now, pandemic. My first question is for Ms. Latimer. In your report to Council under the Pandemic Playbook for Business Continuity and Adaptation section, you list a few critical community services, and I was kind of surprised that solid waste was not included there. So I'm curious where solid waste management fits in terms of service level.
Yeah, through the mayor, it's a great question. Solid waste is definitely a critical service and fits in with most of our public works services are critical. I might have missed it on my report. My apologies for that, but it certainly is considered a critical service along with wastewater treatment and water treatment. So I believe in the playbook it is mentioned there as one of the ultimate critical services in terms of one that we need to have required numbers of staffing and would be delivered at any cost.
Great, thanks. And then just curious, I recognize that the playbooks are very much kind of operational in nature. I'm curious what sort of forward-facing component we might share about these playbooks with our community. So there were also a number of touch points around communications and how we let our community know what to expect going forward. I'm curious if any parts of the playbook get released kind of publicly so that the community knows that this is the approach that the district takes if and when a pandemic happens.
Yeah, and through the mayor, I think that's an excellent suggestion. This was our first iteration of the document, and so we wanted to create something initially that could be used and was very accessible for staff. And also the thought behind the playbook was to make it very visual and very, very simple and easy to use. So I think adapting something that could be public facing, certainly we could look at doing that. To explain how we do service delivery at different phases during a pandemic.
Awesome. And one more question, if it's all right with the chair.
Go ahead.
As we go into budget, I remember from your last presentation, Ms. Latimer, that a number of our kind of response and operational costs are no longer being covered under BC Emergency Management. And I'm curious how we're then incorporating these costs into our 2021 budget and how we might be able to highlight those, and if we're still kind of tracking them as pandemic costs that we might be able to at least wave at the province one day and say this is the ongoing operational impact.
And I think, Ms. Glenda, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Yes, we are definitely still tracking these costs. However, as you mentioned, the province is no longer covering them at this time. And so for that reason, with our budget planning this year, we are incorporating those, some of which are non-discretionary costs that will be highlighted as a result of having to face COVID and for safety reasons for staff and the public, and they will definitely be incorporated throughout the budget, primarily non-discretionary because they're operational costs we can't skip for obvious reasons. So yes, they will be highlighted. Thank you.
I have Councillor French and then Councillor Pettengill, and then I'll put myself on the list.
Thank you. And Chair, I'd like to know how long the content review process is expected to take.
Through the chair, just to clarify the question, is that content review for the pandemic response plan, for the playbook, or the COVID safety plans?
Oh boy. Well, all of them.
Through the chair. That's a great question. As Keely mentioned, these are living documents. So the idea was to get versions out as quickly as possible, even if they're not in their final form, so that staff and the ones that are direct to the public as well are able to be used as quickly as possible. So the review process, to answer your question, for all of these documents, it is ongoing, and we are still receiving new information all the time from the health authorities that we want to make sure we're incorporating into these documents. However, we also are trying to make them as available as possible in some form to the users of them. So I'm not sure if that's a very good answer to your question, but we are trying to get them out as quickly as possible, but also making sure that that staff are able to use them in some capacity and that we have the latest information in them.
Okay, well, Chair, the phrase "as quickly as possible" is a bit nebulous. Is that like in the next 2 days or the next 2 weeks, if we were to sort of pin some kind of timeline on it?
Through the chair. Some of the resources are already available. So for example, on the staff intranet site, the COVID safety plans, those are already accessible and available and are updated as information changes. For the playbook, this is, as we mentioned, in the final review, and we do want to make sure that managers who've provided information in there have had the chance to sign off on it before we fully release it. So I think for that, we're looking at a matter of of weeks as opposed to months, and same for the pandemic response plan. I hope that clarifies the question.
Yeah, that definitely helps. And Chair, one more question, if you'll let me. It looks like great work, and I'm with Councillor Stoner in feeling like it could be valuable to others, including maybe some in our business community who haven't had the time and resources to put together a document like this for their employees. And I'm also thinking about our neighbors like Lions Bay, West Vancouver, Whistler, Pemberton. Has there been community collaboration with other communities and stealing of good ideas back and forth? I'm thinking more of other communities stealing your good work. I'm just interested to know about that collaboration.
Through the chair, that's an excellent question. So in terms of local government emergency management programs coordinating together, that is certainly the case. We have a standing weekly coordination call with all emergency managers in the Sea to Sky area, and then we are on a separate coordination call with all emergency managers in the Lower Mainland and Southwest area. And I would say that plagiarism is the rule rather than the exception when it comes to emergency management. And especially in terms of this pandemic response, the sharing of ideas and approaches has been very open between communities, and that's been very beneficial in terms of making sure that we are able to offer the best resources to staff and to the public.
And Megan, I can just echo that on the safety side of it. The BC Municipal Safety Association has all like organizations from Surrey, Vancouver have all posted their COVID plans with their safe work practices, and we were able to review and share, and there's a discussion group. So anyone has a question about how they're managing a specific COVID-19 issue, we share those resources across the organization. And then yes, most of the COVID-19 safety plans are very similar as they've been you copied and pasted. So, but then adapted to their specific organization. So.
And I will just add on to what Jenny said there to answer the second part of your question, Councillor French, is that in terms of resources for the business community, I know our economic development team has been working very hard to provide resources through the Here for Squamish campaign and connecting local businesses with resources that are available at both the federal and provincial level in terms of business-specific continuity planning. And I think, we can certainly look at coordinating with them to see if any of these resources might be adaptable for that community as well.
Chair, that's great. I think this is a good example of where plagiarism and collaboration collide in a good way. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. And I hope this isn't too much of a tangent, but I understand this is supposed to be a general pandemic playbook. And we've got 4 phases, which are our phases. I understand with COVID, they're driven largely and aligned with where the province is. But I also, and we were talking about waste and so on, that measuring from human waste is a very effective way with COVID to see where a community actually is, or a sub-portion of a community. So as we're looking at this, have we, or should we sort of think about, are there times when we should be doing our own testing and possibly, you know, having our own phasing separate from the province, or is our expectation we'll always align sort of with what the province is saying?
Ms. Glende.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. Thank you. At this point, as the CEO of the organization, my recommendation would always be to council to follow the provincial health guidelines. It takes the subjectivity and emotion out of a decision when it comes to a pandemic. That said, if there was a future pandemic where that wasn't appropriate, we would certainly look at it. But based on COVID, I would recommend always following provincial health guidelines.
Finished? Thank you. And that was actually substantially my question as well. And so just back to Ms. Glende, I mean, are there situations where I can certainly understand us meeting the provincial standard? Are there situations where we might go farther, and how would that decision be made?
Yes, I know that there are some communities, an example would be Whistler, in their facilities have just mandated masks. And as staff, we talked about that. That's a different context. When I reached out to the CAO of Whistler as an example, given the level of visitation, the configuration of the pedestrian village as a tourism destination. So we still at this time believe that we should continue to follow the provincial health guidelines as opposed to mandating masks and going beyond it. That's an example of a case by case where as staff we discussed it. At this point, I haven't brought anything to council in terms of whether council wants to go beyond the health guidelines, because I don't know that council wants to be having those conversations or not. But in that particular example, I don't think it applies to Squamish, but certainly I would keep my eyes open to add if this context shifted.
Thank you. I'll go to Mary Elliott.
But just to follow up on that, yesterday Dr. Henry said that it's now an expectation that masks are worn in all indoor public spaces, and she recommended that all businesses revisit their safety plans in that regard. So I'm under the impression that that is happening within our 4 walls as well, based on her recommendation yesterday.
Yes, thank you. I haven't had a chance to. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Is that a good assumption, Ms. Glende?
Yes, it is a good assumption. I haven't had the opportunity yet to circle around with our HR team and the safety team about it, but that is, again, it's not mandated. So the expectation term that Dr. Henry is using, we would follow.
Thank you. Seeing nothing further and mindful of time, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for the good work you do going forward. So with that, council, we will move on to item 4, Sustainability Group Climate Action Update. Mr. Pickett. There you are.
Hello, can you hear me?
Barely.
Barely, yeah. Your volume has to come up somehow.
Oh. How about now? Is that any better?
Yep, better. Could go a little higher even.
Here, I'll try to speak right into the speaker. Is that acceptable?
It's barely acceptable.
Well, that's about what I shoot for. So no.
Speak loud.
Okay, I'll try my best to speak.
That's better. Go ahead, the floor is
I'll
yours.
just take a second and share my screen here. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate you bearing with me as I sort this out. All right. Hello, everyone. As you are aware, my name is Ian Pickett, and I'm the Manager of Sustainability and Climate Change here at the District of Squamish. We are here today to provide an update on progress to implement the Community Climate Action Plan, or the CCAP. The sustainability team is all here to help with answering questions, etc., as they come up. So we have with us Jeffrey Wint, our Outreach Sustainability Coordinator, Nicole Staglich, our Integrated Solid Waste Specialist, Dora Gunn, our Transportation Planner, sorry, and as of next week, we will have a Senior Energy Specialist. So as you may be aware, there has been a lot of change in our group. As of Monday, we will have 3 members of the sustainability team who are newer to the team than me. This has been quite administratively intense. I will say by far our biggest accomplishment to date is the people that we have brought on board. Hiring and onboarding has taken a lot of time and support from Chris Wickham, HR, and others. So for the duration of this presentation, I will go through a very quick background, then highlight some of the actions we are engaged in, and we'll aim to leave plenty of time for questions and feedback. So just some quick background. The District of Squamish has committed to achieving 45% emissions reductions by 2030. To find a way to reach these targets, the district embarked on an extensive process. It included the assemblage of a climate leadership team, detailed modeling, significant staff and consultant work, and public engagement. This is what ultimately led to the CCAP. So major assumptions within the document include, 1, that we are measuring and reporting on community emissions. We can still have actions related to others, but this is what we are measuring. The plan has an underlying assumption that we have access to abundant low-carbon hydroelectricity in BC. If and when that changes, we will have to adjust. And also that we are aiming toward our 2030 targets for now. As we get closer to 2030, we will start to think toward 2040 and 2050. Our plan consists of 6 big moves. Each big move has 4 to 8 strategies and 10 to 23 associated actions. The actions are assigned timing and difficulty levels. So we are obviously trying to focus on the short actions now, but not just the easy ones. So in short, this plan is very large, and even it is not enough to get us to where we need to go. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of our implementation efforts. Hopefully Council has had a chance to look over the table that we provided for you. There's just simply isn't time to go over all of the actions that we've been up to. You will notice a lot of progress on Big Move 1. We are fortunate to have dedicated staff people in positions focused on waste management and waste reduction. So a couple of note, we have people on the ground enforcing our waste bylaw. Progress has already been noted, including additional separation bins and materials going to the Material Recovery Center for sorting. Our request to make the Outreach Sustainability Coordinator position permanent is an important step to ensure continued engagement and enforcement. We also just had a project kickoff meeting with a consultant to perform research and gather data toward improving and regulating deconstruction waste in Squamish. Regarding material separation, cameras are being installed at the landfill to inspect loads. We are also working with GFL on a pilot project that would have them separate loads at their own facility and then dispose of the different materials rather than pay the rather punitive rate for a contaminated load. The photo is just one illustration of the level of contamination that can go directly into the landfill. Installation of the landfill gas collection system is underway. The flare tender closes this week. This is very likely to be the biggest single action that the District of Squamish takes to reduce emissions, and the sustainability group has almost nothing to do with it. The Senior Energy Specialist will be exploring for beneficial uses of the resultant gas. As you are well aware, we are planning a lateral expansion of the landfill. We need to do this in a way that promotes material reuse and recycling and helping us move toward a circular economy. We are actively looking into how to best use the space that is available to accomplish all of our goals alongside the expansion. Big Move 2 is another one with lots of associated actions. One of the near-term goals of the CCAP is to increase density along the core transit network using a density bonus system. It is becoming apparent that it could be challenging to build community understanding and support for this goal, given that it represents an intention to foster change in existing and often well-established neighborhoods. Other CCAP initiatives that are underway include a neighborhood node research initiative with UBC, working with an artist and architect to create realistic renderings that showcase the positive benefits of density increase and enhanced communications work. These are all intended to build community support around concepts of densification and changes that help us achieve the CCAP goals. One question that we would be really interested in feedback from council on is whether it makes sense to try to move aggressively on the Smart Growth Neighborhood Incentive Program now, or potentially wait until some of these other initiatives have come to fruition in an effort to build community understanding and support for density. So what this could potentially mean is putting a short pause on the Smart Growth Neighborhood Incentive Program until communication work around the benefits of changes in existing neighborhoods has been completed. Again, this is something would really value your feedback in. We have a senior student developing a car-free proposal for us, possibly for 2021 implementation. This is building off of the excellent streetscapes work that economic development has been engaged in since COVID. We are producing foldable, wallet-sized bike maps for people to help get them around on bicycles in Squamish. Our transportation planner is actively working towards implementing our active transportation plan and also improving transit infrastructure. As you can see on the image on the right, just last week, a new bus shelter was installed outside of the library. 80% of the costs in all of the installation management was borne by BC Transit. Transit future action planning will be underway again after the election is finalized. Oh, the other image that you see on this slide is from Go by Bike Week. We had quite good participation in 2020. It was a little bit challenging because the platform changed. So all of the kind of resources from Bike to Work Week and all of the emails didn't transfer over. So we had to start again in building our participation. But we had over 300 participants, and we're really excited to really ramp that up in June, building off of the momentum that we have established. For decarbonizing transportation, we've created an EV strategy that you're aware of, and we have several efforts towards EV infrastructure. As we discussed this last week, I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail. We are putting in approximately 8 level 2 chargers downtown. With the hopeful success of the Clean BC grant, we're hoping to install 5 level 3 chargers and 8 dual port level 2 chargers. And we also have more EV infrastructure being established more specifically for the municipal fleet. For Big Move 4, decarbonizing existing buildings, one exciting proposal that we are participating in is essentially to create a concierge service for heat pumps. That means there's more of a one-stop shop where people can get information, access funding, go actually purchase and go about the installation of a heat pump in their home. This has been led by the Community Energy Association, and it is the result of research of over a dozen heat pump implementation efforts around the country. So what they've done is they've pulled out examples of the most successful ones, figured out the attributes that made them successful, and are trying to pull those together for this program. A huge boon for this big move will be the new senior energy specialist. The primary role of this position is to address demand-side management for corporate and community buildings. So this person is going to be crucial in helping us to increase energy efficiency in our community. Just to remind us, our goals for this big move are for 40% of residents to complete energy retrofits and 6% of residents to install a heat pump or other zero carbon heating system. There's also significant interplay between efficiency and electrification. It's very hard and very expensive to electrify what isn't already efficient. The Municipal Energy and Emissions Plan will inform and direct these efforts as well, and I'm going to discuss that more in Big Move 6. So for Big Move 5, constructing better buildings, the low carbon incentive was developed by planning and presented to you earlier in October. We were happy to hear general support for this. I believe the plan is for planning to separate this incentive program from the Density 1 and move forward with engagement on the low carbon incentive individually. The senior energy specialist will also be helpful in this big move. One of the big things that needs to happen is training and education programs regarding the energy step code for all sorts of different people, from realtors to construction workers to developers. The Municipal Energy and Emissions Plan will also have a lot of input into how we go about building better municipal buildings. So, as you recall, with the recent Valley Cliff Fire Hall, there was a lot of excellent questions that council brought forward. Staff were able to make good decisions and plan for a low carbon and efficient building. But had we had this plan, it would have provided a really helpful roadmap. It would have provided goals, benchmarking, etc., and would have made that process much simpler. We are also interested in things like low carbon concrete, promoting wood as a building material, and maybe even using blue carbon as an offset. So these are other things that would be incorporated into the Municipal Energy and Efficiency Plan. So for Big Move 6, this is kind of an umbrella big move that is other organizational actions. There are a lot of things going on. One that I will highlight is efforts into communications. We really need to have an interface with the public that is positive, that is engaging, that gives people information in a palatable way. So we are trying to create a really strong website that helps people understand the challenge and helps people to guide their decisions. A lot of what we're going to do within this is look at community consumption-based emissions and larger emissions that might not be captured within the CCAP and point people towards individual choices that they can make. We also would really like to put the municipality in the spotlight in this. So taking the Municipal Energy and Emissions Plan and showcasing what the community, what the district is doing to provide a good example. Another thing that we are supporting is social procurement. So looking at a better procurement policy that effectively incorporates considerations associated with greenhouse gas emissions and the environment. And as I mentioned a few times earlier, the corporate emissions strategy is something how we need to really lead by example in the district and guide how we lower emissions. So in discussion with it, it's hard to call this the CEEP because that's kind of what we did for the CCAP. So Chris Wickham came up with the really good idea that we should call it the Municipal Energy and Emissions Plan, or the MEEP. So Chris did some really extensive research, probably conducted some focus groups, and came up with the communication slogan for it. So we can just go MEEP, MEEP. Apparently, you needed a PhD in aerospace engineering to come up with that. Just kidding, Chris. I actually think it's a great idea. Switch sides as quickly as possible. No. Yes, Chris is actually calling me. No, just kidding. So in summary, we are working very hard. We're learning, we're collaborating, we're sharing, and we're working toward this goal. So, a few things have happened. A lot of things are in the works, and we completely recognize that a lot more needs to happen. I'm feeling quite good that we're reaching the point that we can kind of get out and look above the weeds or the trees and starting to look at how things are interrelating and playing off each other, and look forward to really growing and building on this. So with that, welcome your questions, your comments, and your feedback. Thank you very much for your time and for listening to the presentation.
Thank you. Council.
Stop sharing.
So I have Mayor Elliott to start. Councillor Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Piggott. In terms of feedback on the smart growth incentive, I'll start there. One, I had a question about whether working with a land economist to understand the impact of changing zoning and what that might do to land prices and prices that across the board. So that was my first question: is are we bringing that?
Somebody should be muted. Rustling around. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
That was my first question. To try and understand, maybe it's planning staff that can answer this, is whether we are consulting with a land economist to understand what the impact would be of that move in terms of increasing density along the transit network and neighborhood hubs.
Go ahead, Mr. Piggott.
I full-heartedly apologize. I just lost my audio as soon as you started talking, Mayor Elliott. I apologize. Can I defer to someone else on staff to answer this question, and I'll make sure to listen to the record of this? I apologize for that. Or if it would be easier to reiterate it, I'm happy with it.
Repeat the question.
Jonas.
Mr. Belaniskis?
Yes, so thank you. Good question. So we are using a land economist to see what the viability of, what is the breaking point to where it starts making sense for developers and owner builders to go to other forms of housing along the transit network. We have not looked at the possibility of increases in land value as a result of this. So we were just looking for the breaking point where it just starts to make sense for developers to build anything other than a single family home. And I guess so that would be the minimum threshold to from where, if we increase density substantially, you know, that would spur land speculation. But I think that the analysis we ran just identified the minimum required threshold for density.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking is because BC assessment looked at highest and best use, and so if we upzone all this land, people's assessments go up, and that can affect affordability as well. On paper, it looks like you have a lot, but if you as a result then have to pay higher taxes, that can be a burden. So I just want us to be mindful of the full impact of making that change. And to your point, Mr. Piggott, I absolutely think we should be doing education and showing pictures and answering that question, what's in it for me? A lot of people think that density is the dirty word when it comes to improving neighborhoods, but there's a lot of health benefits around making neighborhoods more walkable, providing transit in terms of health impacts, air quality impacts, community cohesion. So I think it's important that we work with the community to talk about the big picture goal of what we're trying to achieve before we pass a program that increases density without people understanding why. The other thing, when we talk about the energy retrofits and some of the ideas around mass thermal imaging or fuel switching and doing that with other local governments, I think these are the projects where we have to have an equity lens. So the part about increasing home efficiency through retrofits is actually to lower your total cost of ownership, those ongoing costs. And that's actually more difficult for lower income families, but the benefit to them of being able to retrofit their home and lower their operating costs is huge. I think it's Saanich that might have a project right now that's targeting lower income homes around retrofit somewhere on the island, but I think that is the lens we have to put across both of those ideas around fuel switching is where do we focus first? And maybe it's education to the folks that have more money or have more capacity to take grants or loans, and focusing on a different incentive program or a different way to come at it for those in lower income households who would feel a greater benefit in their back pocket. So I think those moves are excellent, but I just don't want us to lose that equity focus. And, in terms of procurement, are we keeping our regional local governments apprised of where we're going with social procurement? And I don't know who could answer that, because that's a project out of the finance.
Through the mayor, can I'll first address your first feedback, if you don't mind, Mayor Elliott. Those are excellent points. Two of the incentive programs that we are planning to access through the Senior Energy Specialist is energy efficiency support for rental housing, and also energy efficiency support for low-income housing. The District of the District of Saanich actually has a senior energy specialist who is presently working with the community, and I presume that those are two of the supports that they've been using to make gains in that realm. With regards to procurement, Anthony Jeffrey is of course leading that. He is
at the same time, we don't have people municipal hopping to try and avoid where we're going with that. And my last question is, what happened to the community carbon marketplace? And is that going to go disappear, or is it going to get a shot in the arm because there's a better way to promote that sort of innovation and change?
All excellent points through the chair. So far, we have been talking to Whistler about joining forces on procurement, largely for resources to get a better procurement policy and to enjoy mutual gains. For the community carbon marketplace, that is one action that we decided that we were not going to take on in 2020 due to some of the interesting events that happened in 2020. So in our strategic plan, we noted that was one of our delayed actions. We have got some feedback on that. There are some really excellent aspects of the community carbon marketplace. Others have done, not competing, but there are different platforms out there to support that we're looking into, and it might be a combination of a couple. The one thing with the community carbon marketplace is there's room for improvement to make sure that the offset that you get is assigned in perpetuity to the district. So to add to that program a few more checks and balances is something that we are looking into. But we decided to go full bore toward the CCAP in 2020, and I've put that in the on deck circle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, and then seeing nobody else at the moment, I'll put myself on the list.
Thank you. Mr. Pickett's, in my experience in the construction industry, going back to some years, and in my experience talking to contractors working for rental projects in my neighborhood, I despair at the what happens with waste at construction sites. And the answer I'm often given by my employers and by my neighbors' contractors is, look, it's in the budget. We're just passing on the bill to the client anyway. Sorry, we don't really have incentive to do what you're suggesting. I guess my question is, can we, because I see various things going on at different types of contractors building sites, is there potential for a nuanced approach to bring about better practices? And we have the carrot, the stick, and enlightenment. These are three ways that we can affect behavior. Can we over time find a nuanced approach in applying different strategies for different constituencies out there in the construction industry?
That's an excellent point and question, Councillor Anderson. Through the chair, So one thing that we're extremely excited about is that we have people on the ground enforcing our waste bylaw right now. There's been a number of challenges to date until that, but now we're at a stage with COVID, and we have an outreach sustainability coordinator with significant waste management and construction expertise that is going around to these sites. So we are enforcing the bylaw at the site, at sites, and at the landfill. We are the one thing that we have put into place is the mixed waste fee at $375 per metric ton is kind of where the incentive is built in. So that compared to $170 for general waste or $90 to $120 for wood waste. We have put forth a contract for a number of consultants to give us insights into how we can go about improving our deconstruction practices within the municipality. So whether that be a bylaw, whether that be a policy, we're not at a point yet to kind of address, as you note, the nuance of between the different sizes of the sites. Essentially, we can't not have these costs be passed along to a developer, but we can show all levels of contractor how they can save money, both by avoiding fines, avoiding tipping fees by complying. So one thing that, that enlightenment is something that is moving forward quite quickly right now that we're happy to report. So we're bylaw is visiting. We're about to apply some sticks. We are about to hopefully get some more enlightened folk, and maybe with the bylaw we can have some more carrots. Thank you. It's an excellent point and something we all recognize we need to keep working on.
Well, thank you. It'll be interesting to follow progress as we go. Chair, I have a second question on the wood waste issue, and I'm pleased to see the attention being given to it in your implementation plan here. My question, I hope, is a quick one, and that is whether we can integrate wood waste streams. And I do recognize that some are come under different regulatory envelopes, if you like. But the three streams that are not mentioned in the report here are construction and demolition waste, land clearing and land remediation. And land remediation, I'll just highlight waterfront landing has tens of thousands of tons of wood waste still there on the ground. There has been a lot of work done, but there's a long way to go. And right now that's being landfilled at the forest industry site. Thirdly is timber harvesting close by, for example, in the community forest. So my question is, can we look to integrate wood waste streams to in a combined integrated approach to see what kind of efficiencies and synergies may arise out of that?
Thank you. Through the chair. So unfortunately, at this point in time, as you recall from our presentation a couple of weeks ago, waste to energy is, just given the timing toward implementation on its own, it's not viable as our long-term waste management approach at this point. If some sort of waste to energy system is viable, it's very likely to incorporate wood waste into it, because we would need that, it would give us some more economies of scale. One thing that I'm personally excited for is for the senior energy specialist to take on the challenge of renewable natural gas. So RNG is a really big priority for in the province, one of many, but for a potential beneficial end use of that waste stream. So it's also tricky because there's different jurisdictions associated with the waste. As the municipality, we want to do what we can to reduce emissions in that sector and to be a productive player. However, they're not ultimately under our jurisdiction. That's not to say they're not partially our responsibility, but we will want to continue to bring people to the table and collaborate toward that without necessarily being the ones to make that decision. So,
Mr. Pickus, I may have unfairly given you too broad of a question. I wasn't reaching towards waste to energy, but you actually do lead me to a follow-up question, if I may, Chair. And this concerns the senior energy specialists. You've mentioned RNG. There are, in fact, I have a number of years of background in wood waste, and there's different pathways and ways we can go, and a lot of uncertainty as to which way we should go, and maybe there's different ways at the same time. But RNG has been implemented with respect to wood waste at Fruitvale in the southern interior, and the company involved has also been involved in the Howe Sound region. My question to you, can we utilize our Fortis-supported senior energy specialist to advise us on RNG and wood waste in RNG and in a Howe Sound context? Because the scale may need to be a Howe Sound context. Fortis has been involved at Port Mellon and other sites, and so I guess the question is, does the terms of reference for that senior energy specialist, could it encompass bringing that person into the wood waste working group discussions?
Through the chair, absolutely yes. So there's 5 main priorities associated with this position. Corporate efficiencies, so looking at corporate buildings and energy efficiency, community buildings, low carbon transportation, BC Energy Step Code, and the 5th one being developing and utilizing RNG in the community. So that is something that we are excited to have kind of a segue into expertise that will help us to inform how to create and how to use beneficial RNG. So it is in the work plan, yes.
Thank you. So that develop and utilize RNG in the community could in fact encompass engaging in the wood waste discussion and Howe Sound discussions.
Yes, without well being mindful of our parameters and our scope. Thank you.
Chair, I have 2 more questions, but I'm happy to pass on to the next persons.
Thank you. And that would be me, and then followed by Councilor Pettengill. So I just on the density bonusing and the feedback, and we might have discussed this earlier, but when I first read that a couple of things occurred to me. One is it's obviously simpler to apply it to the next subdivision or area than it is to go back and re-engineer an existing subdivision. And with that in mind, on the heat pump thing, I personally don't have one, but I had friends install one in their house, and it is several thousands of dollars for just the average modest home in Squamish. So it's not a simple thing, and there is perhaps a matter of equity in there when you're dealing with something like that. The second is the idea of, I get the incentive part of this, but contained in that, there is sort of a penalty aspect to some of it. Somebody has a single family lot today and wakes up one day and finds that they can only build a third of what they thought they might be able to build unless they don't use gas. And so I think, if we're going to get to that point, I think there's a lot of education to do, because you're dealing in a country where the other 2 senior levels of government are promoting the natural gas industry. And now we have to tell people in Squamish, but sorry, you can't use it unless you're prepared to shrink your home considerably. So that to me is more of a penalty rather than an incentive. It's maybe just a personal perspective. And so I think we want to be careful, and I think we would want to carry the public along in an education program before we ever got to that phase. There may be, to answer your very first question, I think there may be easier pickings to put our resources to in the short term rather than get into that program. But I'll leave it with that. Councilor Pettengill.
Yes, thank you.
Well, unless you wanted to comment to that, Mr. Pickett, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, thank you. Thank you for the feedback. If Mr. Valeniskis or Mr. Gunn would like to, though, they have more expertise in that.
I didn't need a comment. It wasn't a question.
Okay.
So we'll go to Councilor Pettengill.
Thank you. A few things, and just to respond quickly, one of the things I keep on reading in studies is the public is actually pretty ready for change and are expecting action, and it's us politicians that are holding things up. And so I appreciated the slide that says we've got some good things on the go, but we've got a long way to go. And so I say giddy up. In terms of the actual density, in terms of density around transit hubs, I still have a bit of mixed feelings about that. I think for me, avoiding some of the residential versus commercial versus industrial islands in sort of the home-based business type approach instead might give us a little further, a little faster with less public pushback. But I do think as a secondary, supporting those transit corridors is important. So maybe now is the time to do a bit more education, and I'll sort of leave it at that for that piece. One of the things in the community action plan is sort of recognizing that there are still gaps, that we always have to be watching for opportunities and seizing them. So just unclear a bit about when or how, and is it expected that staff exclusively does that, or is this sort of our opportunity as a council to say, oh, I was just at FCM Sustainability Conference and like, here's these fantastic things I heard about. How do you see that and see the plan evolving?
That's an excellent question, Councillor Pettengill, through the chair. One thing we were thinking is that it's essentially been approximately 6 months since this plan was adopted. We believe that it would be a really good time to have a fulsome review of it in 1 year, so 6 months from now. So like we're very interested in your feedback and comments right now, but maybe in another 6 months would be a time to really kind of look at it, look at where it needs to be added to, and examine what we're doing. So that's one thing we had in mind. Another thing I will defer to Ms. Glenday and other people with more experience in this about the proper conduit to receive ideas and information, but I for one am extremely interested to hear what other people are finding. I know a number of councillors have excellent networks and get all of this really good information and best practices. So so definitely quite open to that. And I personally do feel optimistic. There has been a lot of administrative work associated with this group thus far, but I do believe we're kind of getting to a point where we can be a little bit more nimble and a little bit more, to look forward toward more opportunities and kind of see the connections and synergies between them. So definitely, in whatever the most appropriate way to do it is, am certainly interested, and or whoever would be in the sustainability group to get your feedback and ideas. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I guess just I have so much stuff, but two things I'll pick out. One at FCM. Well, there's so much at FCM, but watching in Ontario, which has a much colder climate, their affordable housing developments. They did a lot of analysis, and after all that, they decided going all electric was going to be far cheaper than gas. And they did efficiency retrofits. They're external, and then put solar on the roof. And in Hamilton, they were doing the same thing with high-rise apartment buildings. And so when they did the sort of longer-term analysis, electricity was by far cheaper. Now, again, that was tied to efficiency, but that's been in the back of my mind with some of our discussions. The other one I'll call out right now is, and I sort of spoke to Woodfibre about this a bit earlier, but there is some discussion about incremental sort of metrics versus a carbon budgeting approach. And the way it was explained to me is, a lot of us are comparing ourselves to arbitrary 2010, 2015, whatever starting points, and we'll reduce our emissions by this much based on some historical thing. But ultimately, we have to be at zero or actually negative emissions fairly quickly. And so the idea is that you always measure yourself against that forward-looking metric. Because everyone's falling short right now. And so our task just annually is actually getting bigger. And so by keeping all of us on that end goal, rather than looking in the mirror, the thinking is that will propel us to the action we need to take much faster. And I found that really interesting, and it seemed to make a lot of sense to me.
Thank you. Councillor Herford. Councillor French. You're muted, Armour.
Is that an indication that he's taking the pass?
Sorry, I was trying to pass because my system was giving me a bit of grief. The density bonus pieces, I just wanted to weigh in on, and overall, the most challenging piece of that, I mean, any policy that we roll out is going to need to have a robust community engagement aspect to it, and I don't see this being really any different. It is important. The pieces that I had particular challenges with were the ones around the community hubs, particularly Valley Cliff, Brackendale, and the Garibaldi Estates is in there as well, but it was excluded because of the ongoing or sort of scheduled specific area plan that's going to be happening for that area. And I move faster than having specific area plans for required before these are rolled out. But I think somewhere between the two approaches of having a specific area plan and a blanket approach is where I would feel comfortable. I feel the context of just lot sizes, even in the affected areas in between Valley Cliff and Brackendale, put them in a totally, they feel very different to me. I don't want to wait, however, for the specific area planning process, as it's long and arduous and expensive. So, but somewhere between where we are and that specific area level planning would make me feel more comfortable, and I believe would make the community feel more comfortable with these particular actions. The rest of it, I don't have I think the need to move swiftly is important. So, but those pieces I think we can do better than what we've seen so far. And I believe I did my best to express that much in the initial meeting as well. But that's where I am on that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, Council?
Councilor French.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Councilor French. Sorry. Then the Mayor, Councilor Pettengill, Councilor Anderson.
I'm just thinking about the bigger picture of what I've seen so far with the climate plan, and maybe I've missed it. School District 40, are we liaising with them in any way through all of this? What level of communication do we have with the school district? Maybe I'll just throw a little bit of context into that question. I see the what I believe is a wood burning facility at House Sound Secondary School that's supposed to be part of an energy supplement system, I believe. I don't know a ton about it. I have heard that feedstock is an issue for that facility. So, this has me just wondering, what's our level of participation and dialogue and communication with School District 48?
So through the chair, personally, I have not engaged with School District 48 about that project at all. With the educational institutes, the Safe Routes to School planning, Dora Gunn has been engaged in that for quite some time. That's tangentially related to climate, but it's not the direct motivation. Also, we're engaged in a educational program through the school districts that we're hoping to roll out in 2020. But those are the two main ways. So that would be something that they have undertaken totally independently. Thank you.
Great. And just on feedback related to smart growth neighborhood incentives, yeah, I think moving swiftly with that, I support. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have Mayor Elliott, Councilor Pettengill, Councilor Anderson, Councilor Stoner.
I just wanted to make sure that I was clear in my comments about the feedback. I think the smart growth one, we should do the education before we move forward and get all the facts. The low carbon incentive should move forward as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Pettengill.
Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify, I too, that was my perspective as well on that. I did want to touch on the equity that was mentioned, and that is something that also came up at the FCM Sustainability Conference. And I think in a previous discussion, I had said the only metric that really matters in this is the GHG reductions, and number of EVs and all of that isn't stuff that I wanted to focus on too much. But something challenged me a little bit on that, and an example was given. One community, how one of the ways, in addition to GHGs, they're measuring sustainability is the number of girls on bikes. And the thinking there is that that looks at, it sort of encapsulates equity, it encapsulates in terms of gender, it active transit and safety, if people feel safe they're on bikes. And so it gets a whole lot of the equity and quality of life things that we're trying to achieve, and it's encapsulated in some of these metrics. So it's really had me thinking about, are we measuring the best things given the goals that we want to have? And it seems like there's some real opportunities there.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Some final comments on 3 different topics. Briefly on the wood waste, I think the issue that Councillor Frenchs raised with the project of biomass heat on the part of the school district is another illustration of the need to consider an integrated picture and their supply chain as well as what they're doing with it. It's diverse. It also is regional, and I see that I'm very happy with the phrasing and the description of the enterprise here. Regional is highlighted, and also the province. Now, the partnership with the province is not only because they may have land that may be useful, they in fact don't, probably, but the resource that we're looking at is a Crown resource, the Crown Timber resource. And they do have some responsibility to see, to kind of have an overview and help us with the fate of that Crown Timber, 10% of it being ending up as waste. So the provinces really does need to be involved, and sometimes they need to be reminded. I'd like to move on to the topic of the density, and I was going to refer to some slides you had, Mr. Pickus, but I won't need to. The topic of education around density, research project with UBC around density is highlighted in several places, and my colleagues have all referred to it nearly. I feel I would like to raise a concern. I happen to live in a neighborhood that has a building scheme, and subdividing properties is something that over the years has never been supported in my neighborhood. We're not on a transit core issue, so it's not an illustration in that sense. We're not on a core transit route. But when the prospect of subdivision has come up, we have rallied and gone to the lawyers, and we will do so again. And I say this because I would like to suggest that the effort of your department and planning department, we should really be careful to ask people, neighborhoods, why they have this response. I think it's very important also for the UBC people that you might draw in. They should maybe also be involved in, why do we have the largest petition in the history of this community is around this issue, and it came to us last spring. It was on a particular issue of a variance or a couple of variances, and those are clumsy venues for discussing what we need to have a community dialogue about. But that dialogue needs to be two-way. I think that our district also needs to ask questions and ask questions of neighborhoods. Why are you concerned? What are the issues that you point to? Instead of, and maybe my main point is that I don't think we should appear to be coming from top down with a firm idea. I think we need to have a dialogue and a two-way exchange with neighborhoods. What are their concerns? And from my past experience working with UBC people or observing them in our smart growth on the ground charrette exercises 15 years ago now, they were wonderful people that brought a lot of skills, but they lacked the grassroots knowledge and perspectives that we will inevitably have in a small town, and that they will take some time to recognize, if you like. So that I think we need to have a two-way dialogue about the course we're taking, and to make sure that we're not appearing to be too heavy-handed. Finally, and I will be brief, Chair, on the matter of construct better buildings, that's big move number 5. And in your slide, it's your second last in the slate that has been distributed to us. The item the last item under Big Move 5 is support or encourage wood-based building materials or other materials that store carbon. And that is not in our work plan yet that we are discussing today. It is, however, highlighted in the recent Loggers Lane East neighborhood plan that the planning department has approved, which I think is interesting. I'm raising this matter because I think it's an evolving picture and we need to be focused on this. We can look around us. President Macron has just announced that he is imposing on all public bodies in the country of France that manage development to construct their buildings with material that is at least 50% wood or other biosourced material. That's coming from France, the president of France. So the world is recognizing embodied carbon, and we are not in our work plan that we're discussing today. And the main reason I want to point this out is that it should be an economic development opportunity for Squamish. And we can look to connect the dots more clearly. And I do recognize it's a work in progress, you working with several other departments in this plan. And but we are looking at a sector here that is shrinking and not growing, is green building. It's shrinking. And we should be not neglect this particular topic because it is a great opportunity for us, but also as an export opportunity. So that element of Big Move number 5, I think we should keep in focus. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll wrap it up with Councillor Stoner, and then mindful of time, we'll have to move on. And for anybody watching, I know there's a number of people waiting to hear the campground issue. That will be in the meeting following this one.
Thank you, through the chair. I'll be quick. I just wanted to voice my support for separating the Smart Growth Neighborhood Incentive Program from the Low Carbon Incentive Program. I think that will also help with our communications to the community by separating those, so fully support there. And I also wanted to mention thank you for the update. I realize that there's been lots of administrative challenges or changes in the department, and Mr. Pickett, you're just getting your feet under you with a fairly large portfolio. So appreciate the update and start to see already some of the nuances in terms of finding the opportunities that are presenting themselves and pivoting where we need to. One request for future updates on plans would be to provide some sort of indication of things that are completed, underway, or expected to start. That was one piece that I found quite difficult going through your staff report relative to the actual Community Climate Action Plan. One other piece is specific to the Municipal Energy and Emissions Plan. Although it has a great name, as much as we can do in terms of communicating how that is different from the SEEP and the Community Climate Action Plan, the sooner the better, because even my reading through it was difficult to parse that out. So whatever we can do to differentiate that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sarah, do you mind if I just respond to that quickly?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your points, Councillor Stoner. They're well taken. Just a little bit of broad thinking about the Municipal Energy and Emissions Plan is one thing we're hoping to do is for it to look and be directed in a markedly different way than the CCAP. The CCAP, to be blunt, is a bit of a beast. It's a very large document. We're looking for like a 4-ish page blueprint with very specific actions oriented toward the municipality. So your point is well taken, and we are excited to appropriately differentiate it explicitly from the CCAP and orient it directly to certain actions. So it might look a lot more like a manual. Thank you.
Good. Mr. Pickett, thank you very much. A very informative update. And we'll probably have more of these as we go along. So Council, we are a little over time, but I'm looking for a motion to terminate the meeting. I will repeat to the public that the campground discussion is in a different meeting, so we're going to terminate this one. We will then take a 5-minute recess to allow some changes and then start again. So looking for a motion to terminate this meeting. Moved by Councillor Herford. Councillor Stoner seconds. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. So we will be in recess, or between meetings, let me say, for 5 minutes. We'll start the next meeting at 25 after 4. And it will be on this platform. Nobody has to change platforms.